Okay, everybody. Good afternoon and welcome to the City Planning Commission Review Session of March 28th, 2022. I'm Dan Garodnick. Good to see you, commissioners. We have a decent size agenda today, so I don't want to dwell on introductions here. I'm going to go right to Ryan and right to the business. Ryan.
Thank you. Good afternoon. And so before we begin our regular agenda for this review session, Michael Morella and Brendan Pilar are here to present on the New York City Comprehensive Waterfront Plan. Michael, Brendan.
Great. Thank you. Thank you, Ryan. And thank you, Chair Garodnick and members of the City Planning Commission. As Ryan mentioned, I'm Michael Morella. I'm the Director of Waterfront and Open Space Planning, and I'm joined by Brendan Pilar, my deputy. And we'll talk to you this afternoon about the city's comprehensive waterfront plan that we released at the end of last year. And we'll focus on climate resiliency and adaptation. Next slide, please. So this is the third comprehensive waterfront plan that the city has released. The first was released in 1992, and that was really an important and formulative document insofar as it was the first document to recommend the creation of waterfront zoning. And the following year, in 1993, the City Planning Commission and the City Council adopted waterfront zoning that required that public access be provided as waterfront sites got redeveloped to higher density residential, commercial, and mixed uses. Following the 1992 plan and significant changes on our waterfront, in 2011, the next comprehensive waterfront plan was released. That document was called Vision 2020, and it looked beyond just the waterfront itself and looked at the waterways that surround our city and using our waterways for transportation, for recreation, for education. And it was one of the very first documents to discuss and plan for coastal climate resiliency, recognizing the changes that will be occurring along our waterfront and in our waterfront communities in the decades to come because of climate change. It's worth noting that document came out roughly 18 months in advance of Hurricane Sandy and was instructive and important because it laid the foundation for much of the planning and the thinking that occurred after Hurricane Sandy as federal funds came in and as we began to put our shoulder into the issue of resiliency. And then last year, we updated the plan, wrote the new plan, released at the end of last year following 3 years of public engagement. And this plan, similar to the other three plans, carries with it no legal authority in and of itself. It's required that it be updated pursuant to City Council legislation that passed in 2008 that requires that the plan be updated in every 10 years. But the plan itself creates a vision and provides a series of recommendations or a series of strategies. But as the previous two plans showed, the power is within those good ideas. It's within that vision and the strategies. Next slide, please. This plan is organized by 6 overarching topics: climate resiliency and adaptation, waterfront public access, economic opportunity, water quality and natural resources, ferries, and governance. Today, we'll just be speaking with you about climate resiliency and adaptation, but encourage you all to look deeper into the document and happy to, of course, to come back at any time should you want additional presentations on any of the other topics. Next slide, please. So on to climate resiliency and adaptation. Next slide. Let's start with some of the facts about our waterfront today. It's worth noting that New York City's coastal flood risk is, of course, very high. The floodplain affects a large geography and includes most community boards and council districts. Today's 1% annual chance floodplain, as defined by FEMA, contains a population of roughly 400,000 New Yorkers, and there are 71,500 buildings located within that floodplain. Of note is the breakdown of the number of buildings and the number of residential buildings the number of residential units. Within the floodplain, 80% of the buildings themselves are in 1 to 4 family units. 7% of the buildings are in larger residential buildings with 5+ units, and roughly 13% are non-residential. Of the residential units, though, only 30% of the units are within those 1 to 4 family units, and 70% of the buildings, of the units are in larger buildings. And this is important because this makes New York distinct from the floodplain across the rest of the United States and presents a challenge to New York City and other urban areas because FEMA's regulations are very much based on a suburban or rural mindset of single-family detached homes. And so one of the challenges that New York City has is that the federal regulations and the federal insurance program are very much geared to that suburban and or rural mindset. And we have to come up with our own strategies for the building stock in New York by and large. Next slide, please. That was looking at just the flood risk that we face today, but we recognize that our floodplain will grow with sea level rise and climate change. And so by the 2050s, the 1% annual chance floodplain is projected to grow in size. It's anticipated to grow further inland. That's going to cover roughly 1/4 of the city's total landmass, and it will very closely resemble what is today's 0.2% annual chance floodplain. And with that growth of the geography covered by that floodplain, the number of people that will be in that future floodplain are expected to be roughly 800,000 residents. That's not counting population change over the course of the next several decades. That's just looking at today's population in that larger geography. And the number of buildings would go up from roughly 80,000 today to 122,000 by the 2050s using the high-end projections. Next slide, please. That infrequent flooding event like a Hurricane Sandy or the 1% annual chance storm is just one dimension of flood risk in New York City. Another dimension of flood risk are those will be facing the lowest lying areas of the city, where sea level rise will lead to what will be regular or even daily tidal flooding in some of the most low-lying areas. And so looking at the projections from the New York City Panel on Climate Change, which I'll speak more about in just a minute, we can see that at the high-end estimates for the 2050s, we are going to see areas of the city facing what will be daily flooding. That will include roughly 70,000 buildings where access to those buildings will be compromised and roughly 47 miles of street. That's a rough estimate based on our GIS analysis. Next slide, please. And in addition to water coming from our shorelines, we also very much have to recognize the changes in weather patterns and the changes in rainfall events due to climate change as well. And while since Hurricane Sandy, so much of our focus has been flooding of our coastlines, Hurricane Ida just last year is representative of the new reality that neighborhoods far inland also face risk of rainwater or severe rainwater flooding. Next slide, please. And so we present this vision for climate resiliency and adaptation. In the next 10 years, urban coastal adaptation will be driven by the climate justice principle that all New Yorkers should live, learn, work, and play in safe, healthy, and resilient and sustainable environments, even as the climate changes. Next slide, please. And so I'll start to lay out the goals and strategies. Next slide, please. So goal number 1 is about expanding the awareness of climate risks and how New Yorkers can take action to adapt to the impacts of climate change. Next slide. Part of this is about building a common understanding of local climate risks. And in New York City, we are fortunate to have the New York City Panel on Climate Change, which is a 20-member independent body that produces science and the science on current and projected climate trends. These are convened at the behest of the mayor, but work independently. The NPCC was codified into Local Law 42 in 2012 with a mandate that they provide an actionable source of climate information on future climate change. And so the table on the right represents the sea level rise projections for New York City. And with the sea level rise projections, I suggest that we need to be wearing bifocals to begin to understand this. We need to understand that long-term implication of sea level rise. And so we need to be looking at the 2080s and the 2100s, and even at that high-end estimate of the 90th percentile of between 58 and 75 inches. And that needs to inform our decisions. But when it comes to projections for building code and design standards, we have to have the clarity of sight in the near term as well. And in the 2050s, at the high end estimate of the 90th percentile, there's an estimate to be 30 inches. And that's what we use for building and design standards, because that's where we have our greatest confidence in the projections. Beyond the 2050s and looking out to the 2080s and 2100s, you'll begin to see that there's a very significant spread in the distinctions between the low, medium, and high-end projections. And that is precisely why we have to understand the implications for end of century, but really have our near-term decisions guided by that midterm projections. It's also worth noting that the high-end projections of roughly 30 inches corresponds with, the high-end projections for the 2050s of 30 inches is effectively the mid-range projections for the 2080s and even into the 2100s. Next slide, please. Part of our strategy is also to expand access to information and other resources for residents and small businesses about flood risk, heat risk, including timely, accessible information about flood insurance, flood preparedness, heat health, and building retrofits. And one of the images shown on the lower left of the screen, the CPC Flood Hazard Mapper, is an example of that. It's a publicly available website where the public can type in their address and begin to understand what their flood risk is today, but also click on layers so that they can see the flood risk going forward for the next decades to come. Next slide, please. And so goal 2 is about applying our understanding of systemic climate vulnerabilities to guide our land use policies and infrastructure investments in our coastal areas. Next slide. And so strategy 2.2 presents a land use spectrum. And it is the intent to employ this land use framework to align development and public investment in housing and infrastructure in coastal neighborhoods, along with the future flood risks. And so where flood risk is high, including areas where sea level rise will lead to daily future tidal flooding, and for which there is limited ability to decrease the exposure to damage and disruption, we see the need to limit density. And the City Planning Commission has already taken actions to establish special coastal risk districts in several neighborhoods throughout the city. And we'll talk more about that in just a moment. In the center of the spectrum, where we believe that adjusting zoning to allow buildings to meet resiliency standards by providing flexibility and removing zoning obstacles, we can support the planned densities in those neighborhoods and adequately manage that risk. And that is what we did with zoning for coastal flood resiliency that the City Planning Commission adopted last year. And then finally, where risk from extreme events can be managed through infrastructure and the context overall can support growth, we seek to encourage density. These are areas of the city that can encourage new development as a means of increasing the resilient building stock. And this is a strategy that played out with Gowanus. Next slide, please. This is underpinned by our understanding of the importance of resilient building design and resilient codes. And this was reinforced during Hurricane Sandy, that resilient buildings can reduce risks to severe flood events like a Hurricane Sandy. So these two photos were taken just a couple miles apart on the Rockaway Peninsula. The image on the left is of Bell Harbor, where erosion and wave action caused that building to collapse and required that homeowner be out of their home for the duration and the expense of rebuilding that home. The image on the right is Arvern by the Sea, a more recent development that was built. Then the entire site was elevated up and the homes were elevated up. And if you look carefully at that image on the right, you'll see the water line on that garage door. That garage door was elevated, excuse me, the building was elevated, and that garage door shows that there was roughly a foot or so of water at the base of the building, causing very little or even no damage to these homes. The homeowner in the building at Arvern by the Sea was able to return to that home within a day or two after Hurricane Sandy, whereas the homeowner on the left had to rebuild anew. And that's the distinction of resilient building design. Next slide, please. That's not just a lesson that we learned during Hurricane Sandy here in New York, but that's a lesson that FEMA has found time and time again. This is a New York Times article about Hurricane Michael that hit the Florida Panhandle a couple of years ago. And the image shows a single home that was built to resilient standards that survived that storm, whereas nearly blocks upon blocks surrounding it were leveled. Again, highlighting the importance of resilient building design. Next slide, please. And so with that understanding, last year, the city passed zoning for coastal flood resiliency that allows neighborhoods to adapt over time by removing impediments that prevented buildings from exceeding those minimum flood resilient standard construction requirements. And we did this through a four-pronged approach. Encouraging resiliency throughout the current and future floodplains. So expanding the applicable geography for these provisions. Supporting long-term resilient design through flexibility in zoning. Allowing for the adaptation over time through incremental retrofits, recognizing that not all homeowners are going to be able to or afford to make massive change all at once. And then the fourth being to facilitate future storm recovery by removing regulatory obstacles. Next slide, please. On the far left-hand side of the spectrum, where we plan to limit density, we've established the special coastal risk districts. These were placed in areas that would face the very frequent or even daily tidal flooding because of sea level rise. Special coastal risk districts have been established in Garrettson Beach, Brooklyn, Broad Channel and Hamilton Beach in Queens, and the east shore of Staten Island. Each of these were following extensive community engagement and years of planning before we entered the ULURP process. The images of Broad Channel, the island in the middle of Jamaica Bay, where we established one of the first special coastal risk districts. It's entirely within that 1% annual chance floodplain. It's subject to both that infrequent storm event and high velocity wave action for portions of the island. It already experiences periodic tidal flooding, a condition that is almost certainly likely to worsen. There's very limited vehicular access to and from the neighborhood today, just one road north and one road south. And the neighborhood is already undertaking a $48 million street and bulkhead raising project to elevate those streets on the left-hand side of the image that are particularly low-lying. Next slide, please. And then planning to encourage density. The recently approved Gowanus rezoning in Brooklyn is a very good example of this. We're built into the plan and into the regulations are more resilient building design, not only of the structures themselves, but also considerations of elevation into the waterfront public access areas. Next slide, please. I'll now turn it over to Brendan to talk about the next few goals.
Thank you, Michael. Good afternoon, commissioners. So while it's clear climate change presents New York City with many challenges, it also presents an opportunity to apply more equitable practices in housing as New York City adapts. This involves ensuring that low and moderate income households in particular are informed and empowered to make choices related to their housing and flood risk. Goal 3 of the Comprehensive Waterfront Plan's Climate Resiliency and Adaptation section builds on the coastal land use framework that Michael just discussed by outlining a need to support housing production for a mix of incomes in appropriate locations and to improve housing conditions for waterfront residents through new or improved programs that offer financial, technical, and counseling assistance. Next slide, please. These programs would be tailored to the different kinds of flood risk that apply to different areas. In areas where buildings are likely to remain, flood retrofit programs are needed so homes can be redesigned to withstand the impacts of flooding. The scenario of neighborhoods flooding regularly from high tides require other programs and services. These programs and services would help residents voluntarily move away from flood risk. These programs could include housing counseling, voluntary buyouts, housing search and moving assistance, estate planning, and down payment assistance. It is important to note that these programs require resources that are well beyond the city's capacity. To address this, the city is actively pursuing federal resources to support housing stability for waterfront residents by either securing resilient housing where they are or planning for and financing a future move. Next slide, please. The next goal speaks to coastal protection. These are the engineered systems that minimize the effects of storm surges, wave impacts, and sea level rise that are part of the city's multiple lines of defense. Coastal flood protection projects work in tandem with design features for buildings and critical infrastructure that raise mechanical equipment, livable space, and other uses above projected flood elevations. Coastal protection projects can be large scale, spanning miles of the coastline and covering multiple neighborhoods. They are cross-jurisdictional projects that require extensive coordination and collaboration. The city's goal is to continue to identify opportunities for coastal protection where feasible to manage the impacts of climate change. Next slide, please. The city is in the process of planning and building out a $15 billion portfolio of coastal protection projects to reduce flood risk in neighborhoods across New York City. Several of the city's post-Hurricane Sandy coastal protection projects are now entering their construction phase. However, given the different funding sources and the varying complexity of these projects, they're expected to come online at different times through the 2020s. One quick note about coastal protection projects. Coastal protection projects often come to the City Planning Commission following years of planning and engagement with land use actions that are relatively minor compared to the scopes of these projects to provide coastal protection and to maintain or even enhance access to the waterfront. These actions can include amendments to the city's streets and grades and the acquisition and development of property that are necessary to link these systems together. The Red Hook Coastal Resiliency Project is going through a process to finalize the alignment of the system, and the Commission may expect to see land use actions to facilitate this project later in 2022. Next slide, please. The city is also working with the Army Corps of Engineers to advance the New York, New Jersey Harbor and Tributaries Coastal Storm Risk Management Study, which is looking at coastal protection on a regional level. The study restarted last November after a 20-month pause during which the previous federal administration declined to provide funding for it. Since initiating the study, the Army Corps has identified 5 approaches based on elevation analyses, feasibility studies, and environmental impact assessments. These scenarios include a massive surge barrier between Sandy Hook, New Jersey and the Rockaway Peninsula, as well as projects the city has long advocated for, such as protections for Newtown Creek, the Gowanus Canal, Jamaica Bay, and Coney Island Creek. The Army Corps is expected to identify and conduct public outreach on its preferred alternative later this year. Next slide, please. The final goal of the plan's climate resiliency and adaptation section is to promote resilient design practices that allow buildings and infrastructure to withstand the impacts of climate change. Next slide, please. The codes and standards that regulate the design of city facilities and infrastructure already incorporate historic weather data to determine how to design for today's conditions. However, historic data does not accurately represent the projected severity and frequency of future storms, sea level rise, heat wave, and precipitation. Going forward, city projects will incorporate forward-looking climate change data through the climate resiliency design guidelines. These guidelines are being piloted on all types of city projects over the next few years to understand the types of design approaches that are most effective at managing different types of climate risks. Next slide, please. In summary, the goals for climate resiliency and adaptation focus on expanding climate risk awareness and action, using climate risk information in public policies and investments, supporting the housing needs of waterfront residents, managing risks from flooding, and promoting climate resiliency design of buildings and infrastructure systems. The strategies that Michael and I have outlined will help New York City do just that. Now, before I wrap up, I'd like to take the opportunity to connect what you just heard about the Comprehensive Waterfront Plan to a project that is coming back to the Commission for pre-hearing. Next slide, please. That project is Resilient Edgemere. With Resilient Edgemere, the Department of City Planning has worked side by side with HPD to apply the coastal land use framework to the neighborhood. You can see how closely the land use actions correspond to flood risk by comparing the projections on the left of the screen to the land use framework on the right of the screen. This is very intentional. As the map of the 2050s sea level rise projections on the left shows, Edgemere is highly vulnerable to sea level rise. For that reason, a new special coastal risk district and amendments to the area's urban renewal plan would place strict limits on future development in the most vulnerable areas of the neighborhood, generally north of Beach Channel Drive. In less vulnerable areas of the neighborhood, generally along Rockaway Beach Boulevard and the elevated A train line, the land use actions would modestly increase residential density to support the development of new, resilient, affordable housing in the neighborhood. Next slide, please. When considering sea level rise projections, it is also important to keep in mind that the projections are a snapshot in time and do not reflect changes on the ground. While Edgemere faces significant flood risk, it is distinct from other areas of the city where the city has established special coastal risk districts, in that the Army Corps of Engineers has demonstrated and has funding for a coastal protection project. The Army Corps is currently designing a system that will reduce Edgemere's exposure to low-level coastal storms and sea level rise. While the potential for coastal protection is encouraging, it reduces Edgemere's flood risk. It doesn't eliminate it. Because of this, HPD is taking a conservative approach to zoning and land use in light of long-term flood risk, while also seeking to enhance the vibrancy of a majority-minority neighborhood. This approach helps demonstrate how the far-reaching goals and strategies of the Comprehensive Waterfront Plan can be applied at the local level in support of a more resilient, more equitable, and healthier waterfront for all New Yorkers. Next slide, please. We really appreciate the opportunity to present on the Comprehensive Waterfront Plan this afternoon. That's the conclusion of this presentation. If time allows, Michael and I would be happy to take your comments and questions. Thank you.
Thank you very much, gentlemen. We appreciate your presentation. I have a couple of questions for you, but mostly one. And the big one question is the way that this commission and the agency should most have its antenna up in this context. As I understand what you're saying, that we should be keeping an eye out for those one-off projects which add prospective density in areas that are flood prone based on what we know. 2, look for opportunities for neighborhood plans like special risk districts, like what we are talking about with Edgemere and what has been done in those 4 other areas. And 3, promoting citywide zoning changes that allow for better planning for coastal resiliency. Is that the way we should be thinking about it, or are there other things that we should be looking for, keeping our antenna up for? I just wanted to pose that one to you guys, to both of you.
I think that's absolutely the near-term approach. I would say that there are a few other things that we should be keeping in mind. The city has the opportunity to continue to make great progress on this work through documents like the next update to Plan YC, 1NYC, and the department will certainly be involved in that work going forward. And then I would just note that the other, we are continuing to understand and evaluate rainwater flooding and what that means in terms of both our infrastructure, buildings, and neighborhoods. And I think that that line of work is also going to be additional inquiry that we're going to be responding to going forward.
Great. Thank you both. Let me see if there are questions or comments from the commission. Commissioner Burney.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, thanks, Michael and team. I must say, I think there's a lot of really strong things about this report. I think the approach to flood risk is really good. The flood resiliency, some really good stuff there. I know you guys have been waiting for a long time with HPD on that stuff. I think it's all good work. I think the idea of encouraging density in areas where we don't have the risk, I think is absolutely appropriate. We've got to try to improve that. If there's a weakness, I think it's in the approach to sea level rise, because the difference between flood risk and sea level rise is that flood risk is temporary. The flood comes and goes. If your buildings are resilient, tide goes out again, and you're good. Sea level rise is permanent. So unless you're thinking Venice, it doesn't matter what you do to your building, you can't get to it if the sea level's risen above that to that level, right? So you get your 30 inches. And places like Broad Channel and Garrettson Beach, they're really uninhabitable. So it seems to me that it would make a lot of sense to make a stronger connection between where we are increasing density and where we foresee in the future being unable to be habitable. And, you know, you've heard of the term climate migration, right? I mean, I think we've got to start thinking more seriously about climate migration, particularly how do we assist those communities that are low-income communities that can't afford just to up and buy a house someplace else, who need to face the fact that within 30 years, which is less than a mortgage cycle now, they're going to be threatened. And I think we need to build that connection and think through how do we plan for that climate migration in those neighborhoods that are particularly threatened by permanent sea level rise within the next 30 years. So that's your homework, Michael.
Thank you, Commissioner. And challenge accepted, because I think that's precisely the line of work ahead of us. Just a couple of points on that. You're absolutely correct in the important distinctions between the infrequent flood events like Hurricane Sandy and what will be the daily tidal flooding. For those lowest lying areas, we have rezoned or are in the process of rezoning the 2 special coastal risk districts, which is essentially tapping the brakes in those neighborhoods, trying to limit the opportunities for increased future densities, recognizing that significant change is going to occur in those neighborhoods one way or another. What we tried to do in the comprehensive waterfront plan is talk about it from the perspective of meeting the homeowner's needs. And that's the whole strategy that Brendan spoke to about homeowner assistance and housing mobility. We use the term housing mobility in the plan to get at this exact idea, because it's really focusing on the needs of the homeowner and not a grand pronouncement from the government about, okay, everyone get out, but meeting the homeowners where they are, recognizing that some homeowners are going to want to stick it out for as long as they possibly can because they have lived in that neighborhood for their entire lives and going back several generations in many instances in a neighborhood like Broad Channel, whereas other homeowners might be willing to move more quickly. And so that's the strategies we lay out. But one of the challenges going forward is the massive amount of funding that's going to be necessary to really be to do that exact type of work. And that's part of the call for additional funding from the federal government for these exact types of programs.
Yep.
Thank you, Commissioner Burney. Vice Chairman Knuckles.
Thank you. And thank you for the presentation, Michael. I'm just wondering, among the multitude of coastal communities within the city of New York, are you able to measure degrees of vulnerability? I mean, I can remember when we were adopting some of the zoning modifications in the wake of Sandy. There was obviously a lot of emphasis on Edgemere and the area that we've talked about in Staten Island. I'm just wondering, are there areas of our coastal communities equally vulnerable across the board, or are there degrees of vulnerability between Queens and Brooklyn and the Bronx, et cetera?
That's a fantastic question, Vice Chair Knuckles. The way I would answer it is that there are multiple dimensions of that risk. And so there are many reports have tried to synthesize the dimensions of risk to come up with one overarching score of vulnerability. I think that's very difficult to do because I don't think that there's an easy way or really even a valid way of saying that the flood risk of that rare infrequent storm event from Hurricane Sandy is weighted to be 20%, whereas the sea level rise risk is weighted to be 70%, whatever it may be. I just don't think that those carry much validity. So I think we have to look at the spectrum of vulnerabilities and the different types of hazards individually, which is to say, I think we have to understand what's in our 1% annual chance floodplain. Where are the most low-lying areas of the city that are going to be facing daily tidal flooding with sea level rise at various decades, given the projections? But I don't think that we can reduce it to just one single new number to characterize the city's waterfront or communities as a whole. One other dimension to that I think is incredibly important to worth noting is that there's the hazard, the natural hazard. There is the implications on the structure, and then there are the implications on the lives of the inhabitants of the structure. And so you could have the same level of flooding with you have the same level of flooding for two different homes. If they're built identically, the flood risk would be the same. But if one homeowner has a mortgage and one homeowner does not, that could be a huge, there could be huge implications for the rebuilding of that home thereafter, for instance.
All right. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Vice Chairman. Commissioner Ramprashad.
Yes, thank you. Thank you for the presentation. I agree with a lot of the comments raised by Commissioner Burney. And one of the things I just wanted to bring up or ask is under the goal 1, when it comes to awareness, have you guys considered taking this presentation and presenting it to all the 59 community boards throughout the city?
It's an excellent suggestion. We've started presenting it externally. We have not yet taken it to the community boards, but we'll certainly discuss that. Thank you for the suggestion.
All right, thank you.
Thank you. Commissioner Ortiz?
Hi, yes. This is a little terrifying, frankly, to see how many New Yorkers are really in the path of some of the devastation that we anticipate around climate change. And Mike, I think Commissioner Burney, often mentions this when we're looking at applications and, why are we building in these places? And recognizing, and you mentioned communities like Broad Channel, where there's a lot of, sensitivity on the part of the city to residents who have very strong ties to these neighborhoods. But there's also the facts, as you laid out, and the continued costs associated with maintaining infrastructure, public facilities, publicly owned assets, repairing the streets, that all of us bear. And, the policies that enable us to continue to reinvest again and again and again, when we know that it's only a matter of time. You've laid it out for us. It's only a matter of time. So, when will we as a city, come to, we're going to have to develop a policy, an investment policy and structure. We've been told when this has come up, that the city is unlikely to be making decisions at that level anytime soon. But it seems like we're going to have to face the facts sooner or later. So, Mike, I'm curious of what you say to that line of thinking and the concerns that have been raised by the commission on this point.
Well, I think that as the City Planning Commission, the land use strategy that we lay out can very much be your guide. And it's not to say that it is guidance overall, after all, rather, but it is also intended to provide the strategy and the logic for where to guide those decisions about land use applications going forward. Where does it make sense to support an upzoning in our coastal zone? What are the factors that need to be considered when we're looking at significant downzonings, like establishing a special coastal risk district? I think those are very much the role of the commission when it comes to these very questions. To the larger question about city policy, I think we're getting there. I think it's conversations that we're continuing to have. In preparation of the city's comprehensive waterfront plan, we worked with all of the major infrastructure agencies within the city who have an understanding of this. Absolutely. The politics, of course, don't always align with the strategy, and that's, of course, a challenge far bigger than the role of the director of the Waterfront and Open Space Division of the Department of City Planning, but one that we're continuing to push on.
I think you hit the nail on the head. That's the biggest challenge that we face. It's not the science, right? Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner. Commissioner Levin.
Yeah, this has been super helpful. And my question has morphed a little bit listening to the last exchange, because Commissioner Ortiz has really gotten to one of the key questions, I think. I was wondering if you could tell us a little bit more, you alluded to it, Mike, about the kinds of planning that other city agencies are doing for this situation. What kind of rebuilding are they building into their budgets? What kind of emergency preparedness work is being done? We know that we're leaving the most vulnerable people in the most vulnerable locations because of the historic pattern, I think particularly in the Rockaways, of locating so much senior housing in areas that we would now never consider building in. What's the broader picture of how the city is planning to deal with this? And are city agencies being realistic about facing up to the challenges that you just discussed with Commissioner Ortiz?
I would say that our partner agencies are absolutely focusing on this. And I think that this has been an evolution of the agency's work in the past really 10 years since Hurricane Sandy, that virtually every city agency has staff that are now knowledgeable and well-positioned to discuss and to push for resiliency in those in their projects. I think that, and certainly with the work that Brendan described of the resilient design standards being an important part of our infrastructure conversations going forward. But I think that there is the challenge of wholesale change, thinking about wholesale change because we are looking at the maps at 2100 or 2080s, let's say. I would just note those maps show current conditions with sea level rise. In the Rockaways, for instance, where there is work being done on the Atlantic shorefront and rebuilding the dunes and heightening the dunes, and then an additional, I believe it's $250 million for the Bayside work already funded and in design. That's going to change the risk picture in the Rockaways. Is it going to eliminate risk? Absolutely not. And nor is that necessarily a realistic objective, but that is going to change the risk profile of the Rockaways. And I would note, though, that over the course of the next several decades, as one of the other strategies lays out that Brendan spoke to, is additional coastal protection, working with our federal partners like the Army Corps of Engineers who are pursuing the harbor and tributary study, which has the potential of having billions upon billions of dollars of infrastructure, which would, of course, significantly change the risk profiles of the communities.
Okay. Thank you. Before I go mute, I just want to thank you for a really clear presentation. You've laid it out in a way. Maybe I need to hear these things 4 or 5 times over, but I think it's penetrated this time in a way that it hasn't before, and I commend you for all your work.
Appreciate that, Commissioner.
Thank you, Commissioner Levin. Commissioner Burney, back to you.
Yeah. Sorry, I don't mean to belabor the point, but just going back to the issue that Commissioner Ortiz raised, that obviously the politics of the situation are understandable and they're a huge obstacle. But it seems to me that, as planners, we can either wait 30 years and have a crisis, or we can start working on it now. And I think as planners, that's our obligation. We're the people that are supposed to be thinking ahead and accustoming people to the process and so on. So no better time to start than now, I would say.
Absolutely.
And you're a young man, Michael. You'll be here at the 30 years. So.
I appreciate you saying that, Commissioner. When I look in the mirror every day, I'm not so sure I agree.
Thank you, Commissioner Burney. Gentlemen, thank you very much for your presentation today. We know we're going to be talking more about resilient plans here today, so we appreciate the intro and all of your hard work on this. Ryan, I'm going to go back to you for the next item.
All right. Our first item on our agenda is a certification of a UDAP designation and disposition of city-owned property, a zoning text amendment, and special permits in Manhattan Community District 4. Presenting for the first time to the City Planning Commission is Ariel B. Ariel? Here we go.
Good afternoon, Commissioners. This is the Rialto West. This is an application by the Department of Housing Preservation and Development, HPD, to facilitate 100% affordable residential development at 705 10th Avenue in the Clinton or House Kitchen neighborhood of Manhattan Community District 4. Next slide. The development is located on a block bounded by 10th and 11th Avenue between West 48th and West 49th Street. The action sought include a UDAP approval with a disposition, a zoning text amendment, and 2 zoning special permits. I'll go into greater detail on each of these actions later. Next slide. The development site is a vacant city-owned zoning lot in the Special Clinton District with an area of approximately 47,000 square feet. The site is in an R8 district and there's a C25 overlay on a portion of the site within 125 feet of 10th Avenue and between the center line of the block and West 49th Street. The western portion of the site is currently occupied by an Amtrak railroad cut. Under the proposed development scheme, the railroad cut will be completely covered by a permanent platform. Next slide. As you can see from this close-up view of the development site, the middle and eastern portions of the site are vacant and the western portion of the site is occupied by the railroad cut. Next slide. And here are photos showing a view from West 48th Street and 10th Avenue looking northwest, and a view from West 49th Street and 10th Avenue looking southwest. Next slide. The proposed development consists of a new 8-story mixed-use building and a publicly accessible open space on a shared zoning lot. The building would have 157 affordable rental units. There will be approximately 125,000 square feet of residential floor area and around 6,000 square feet of ground floor community facility space. There would also be a gym and laundry facility on the ground floor and a publicly accessible Parks Department comfort station fronting the adjacent open space. The rear of the building would also have an approximately 2,700 square foot landscaped inner courtyard for residents. Next slide. As mentioned on the previous slide, there will be approximately half an acre of publicly accessible open space, which would sit on top of a city water tunnel. The space would remain under the jurisdiction of the Department of Environmental Protection, DEP, and would be maintained and managed by the Parks Department. The space would have a plaza and synthetic turf area, spray showers, seating areas, paths, and planted areas. Next slide. Zooming out from the development site itself, the surrounding areas mixed use with residential and community facility uses on the side streets and mixed use residential buildings with ground floor commercial use on the avenues. The building heights range from 4-story walk-ups to 15-story elevator buildings. There are several schools and supportive living services within a few blocks. In terms of open space, House Kitchen Park and Clinton Community Garden are both located within half a block. The area is well served by public transit. There are numerous subway stations within half a mile of the site. Most of the area surrounding the development site is located within an R8 residential zoning district with C15 and C25 commercial overlays mapped along 10th and 9th Avenues. And as I previously noted, the entire site is in a special Clinton district, which extends west of 8th Avenue between West 41st Street and West 59th Street. The site is split between the Preservation Area subdistrict and the Western sub-area. Both areas are subject to the same FAR, height, and setback regulations, which I'll go into greater detail when I discuss the proposed actions. Next slide. And these are some views from West 48th and West 49th Streets next to the site looking towards the east or west. As you can see, the site's immediate surroundings consist of low to mid-rise buildings ranging from 4 to 15 stories tall. Buildings lining 10th Avenue have ground floor commercial uses. The image on the bottom right shows the Red Cross headquarters on West 49th Street next to the site. Next slide. A bit of background for context. In 2009, as part of the Western Rail Yard rezoning, the city committed to building affordable housing at 2 sites. This site, which is DEP owned, and an MTA owned site at 806 9th Avenue. The commission may recall that the proposed development at the MTA site, known as thereto, is subject to a separate application certified on January 3rd and going through ULURP. HPD also obtained UDAP designation and disposition authority for both sites in 2009. Next slide. And now I'm going to go through the proposed actions. The first action requested by HPD is a UDAP approval of the development site. I mentioned previously that HPD obtained UDAP approval and disposition authority in 2009. That was for the future housing portion of the development site. And this newly proposed UDAP seeks to cover the entire lot to facilitate the construction of the open space in addition to the proposed housing. As part of this new set of approvals, HPD is also seeking the disposition of city-owned property with 2 components. Number 1, to allow the transfer of approximately 35,000 square feet of development rights from the open space area to the housing site. And number 2, to restrict construction on the open space area within 30 feet of the facade of the building to provide light and air. Next slide. The second proposed action is an amendment to the special Clinton district text. This text amendment consolidates the existing height and setback waiver into a single section in the zoning resolution and allows modifications to bulk regulations, except FAR. In order to qualify for bulk waivers, the proposed project needs to meet 3 conditions. The zoning lot must be at least 40,000 square feet. It must front on a wide street, and it must contain existing public infrastructure. This amendment was tailored to apply to 2 sites only, the DEP side of this presentation and the MPA side. And as the commission may recall, this text amendment is identical to the amendment proposed in the application for the thereto, which is the proposed development at the MPA site. And therefore, this proposed action will be withdrawn if this amendment gets adopted through that application. The amendment also creates 4 findings for the bulk waivers. These findings relate to difficulties in complying with regulations, light and air, scale and placement, and difficulties on the site. Next slide. Action 3 is a special permit pursuant to the new text amendment that I discussed on the previous slide. It has 2 parts, a height and setback waiver and a rear yard waiver. On your right are diagrams highlighting the various height and setback waiver areas. The proposed building, which is slated to be 77 feet tall, exceeds the maximum permitted height. The building would also have 1-foot setbacks as design articulations above the 6th floor along West 48th and West 49th streets. Since the building is below 99 feet tall, it meets the condition for granting of the height and setback waiver. The commission should determine whether the distribution of bulk permits adequate access to light and air. Next slide. And here's a rendering that highlight the height and setback waiver areas. Next slide. The second part of the special permit is the rear yard waiver. HPD contends that compliance with the rear yard requirement is infeasible due to the presence of the existing city water tunnel and the future open space, which would sit on top of the tunnel. The proposed building's bulk must be concentrated on the western portion of the site where a rear yard or its equivalent would be required. As shown on the drawing, for light and air, the building would have a publicly accessible open space next to it, as well as an approximately 2,700 square feet inner courtyard at the ground level. The proposed development meets the 3 conditions I noted previously relating to bulk regulation waivers. The zoning lot is over 40,000 square feet. It fronts on 10th Avenue, which is a wide street, and it contains existing public infrastructure, which is the city water tunnel. And the commission should determine whether it also meets 4 findings that relate to difficulties in complying with regulations, light and air, scale and placement, and difficulties on the site. Next slide. And last but not least, the applicant requests a special permit for the portion of the railroad cut that will be completely covered by a permanent platform to be included in the lot area of the development site. As you can see on the diagram on the right, the proposed building would partially sit on top of this platform. The applicant has been working with Amtrak, the current user of the railroad cut, who has reviewed the schematic designs of the site and has no objections to the concept. Next slide. And to summarize, HPD is seeking to facilitate the development of an 8-story, 100% affordable housing building containing 157 units and around 6,000 square feet of ground floor community facility space. There would also be a publicly accessible open space next to the building. The proposed actions include a UDEP approval with a disposition, a text amendment, and 2 special permits. And with that, I'm happy to take any questions.
Great. Thank you very much, Ariel. Excellent job. We appreciate it. Let me just, I think I know the answer to this, but I just want to clarify. The disposition is on 2, there's 2, this is a slightly unusual one, which is why I want to highlight it. It's a disposition of development rights to the housing site here. That's one. And the other is restricting construction on the open space. Can you just say a little bit more about those two?
Yes, yeah, the first one is, as you just mentioned, Chair Gorodnik, the transfer of development rights from the open space area to the housing site. And the second one is a light and air easement within 30 feet of the building that would, on the open space, that would prevent construction within the 30 feet, the 30 feet.
Okay, got it. Great, thank you very much. Commissioner Levin.
Yes, thank you, and welcome, Ariel. That was a terrific presentation. There's a lot of history with this site, and you laid out some of it for us. But if I recall correctly, when these two sites, the MTA site and this site, were committed to be developed for affordable housing back in 2009 when the Western Rail Yards got rezoned. There was a points of agreement that also made some commitments about affordability levels for these two sites. I know Community Board 4 is very keen to see moderate and middle income housing developed because they've had a fair amount of low income housing and want to balance things out. But that's kind of turned out to be contrary to the direction that the city is heading overall. And I know with the Lirio, we have some concern about the match between the points of agreement and the housing plan. Can you tell us a little bit about the housing program that's planned here and how that matches up with the points of agreement? Or should we wait to hear about that from the community board?
Yes, and also from HPD during the public meeting.
Okay, but how is this moderate and middle income housing or is something else?
Yes, this is moderate,
Okay.
affordable.
I will chime in a little bit since I'm slightly more familiar with the context here. I think thanks, Commissioner Levin, for the question. So the Lirio project and this project are using, as I understand, different term sheets at HPD. And my understanding is this project would include both low income and moderate income housing. So up to about 130% AMIs. But like Ariel mentioned, we'll look to our HPD colleagues to speak more about it at the hearing.
Okay, we'll stay tuned. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Levin. Commissioner Burney.
Hey, thank you, and thank you, Ariel. It just strikes me that this kind of speaks to how difficult it is to find sites these days, that we have to put a building between a railway track and a water tunnel. It's it's tough to find anywhere to build. But I just had one question on the public open space. There isn't a whole lot of detail, but I'm assuming that this will go to the Public Design Commission where Signe Nielsen can take a look at it. Is that the case?
I'll look into that and get back to you, Commissioner Burney.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you. Okay, great. Well, seeing no other questions, thank you again, Ariel, for your thoughtful presentation here. And this matter is certified. We're going to move on, Ryan, to the next.
Certainly. The second item on our agenda is a certification of a zoning map, zoning text amendments, special permit, city map amendment, and authorizations in Queens Community District 1. Our presenter is Sarit Platkin.
Good afternoon, commissioners. Next slide, please. This is a private application by Astoria Owners LLC for a series of land use actions to facilitate approximately 1 million square feet of development, including 1,400 residential units, including 350 affordable units, 1,800 square feet of commercial space, 23,000 square feet of community facility space, and 43,000 square feet of publicly accessible open space in Astoria Community Board 1, Queens. Next slide, please. The project area is located on the Hallett's Point Peninsula on the East River waterfront. Two major prior land use approvals in the surrounding area include Hallett's Point and Astoria Cove that are jointly anticipated to facilitate over 4,000 units of housing, including 800 affordable units through the Voluntary Inclusionary Housing Program. In 2013, the City Planning Commission approved Hallett's Point, a large-scale general development plan and related actions affecting a 34-acre area along the western and southern portion of the Hallett's Point Peninsula, directly southwest of the project area. The actions intended to facilitate approximately 3 million square feet of development across 11 buildings ranging in height from 11 to 31 stories. The development will consist of approximately 2,600 dwelling units, including 480 permanently affordable units, 70,000 square feet of retail, a public school and public intermediate school, and a 2.4-acre waterfront esplanade. To date, one building, 10 Hallett's Point, consisting of 400 dwelling units, including 80 affordable units, and a fresh supermarket, has been constructed on the northernmost portion of the site. In 2014, the City Planning Commission approved Astoria Cove, a large-scale general development plan and related actions for a 9-acre area along the northeast portion of the Hallett's Point Peninsula, directly east of the project area. The actions intended to facilitate 1.7 million square feet of development across 5 buildings, ranging in height from 12 to 32 stories. The development will consist of approximately 1,700 dwelling units, including 350 permanently affordable units, 50,000 square feet of retail, a public elementary school, and a publicly accessible waterfront esplanade containing 60,000 square feet. To date, construction on the Astoria Cove development has not commenced. Next slide, please. The surrounding area includes a mix of residential, commercial, light industrial, and park uses. The area directly east of the project area includes the Astoria Cove development site and is improved with warehouses and vacant industrial buildings. The area to the northeast of the project area is characterized by high-density residential waterfront development and open space, including the 23-story Shore Towers condominium development and Astoria Park. The area directly south of the project area is characterized by a mix of 1- and 2-story light industrial warehouses, open storage yards, and low-scale 1- and 2-family residential uses. The New York City Housing Authority Astoria houses, consisting of 1,100 units across 22 6- and 7-story buildings on a 27-acre campus, encompasses the southern half of the Hallett's Peninsula. Directly west of the project area is a large 2-story warehouse and distribution center for Airport Enterprise Technology that abuts Whitey Ford Field. The western edge of the Hallett's Point Peninsula includes the Hallett's Point development site that is currently vacant apart from 10 Hallett's Point, a 400-unit residential building with a fresh supermarket 2 blocks west of the project area. Nearby public facilities and institutions include the Astoria Houses Community Center, Urban Upbound Jobs Plus, and Astoria Blue Feather Early Learning Center, located approximately 0.3 miles to the south of the project area, and the St. Margaret Mary Roman Catholic Church and Holy Protection Greek Orthodox Church, approximately 1/3 mile to the east of the project area. Next slide, please. The project area is well served by open space, including the 65-acre Astoria Park, approximately 1/3 of a mile to the north, Whitey Ford Field, a 4-acre waterfront baseball park, 1-block park to the west of the project area on 26th Avenue, and Hallett's Cove Playground, a 6-acre playground and waterfront esplanade that extends across the southern portion of the peninsula. Combined, approximately 9 acres of open space is also planned for the Hallett's Point and Astoria Cove esplanades. Next slide, please. The surrounding area is served by several modes of public transit.
I think I was finally able to do it on.
I think somebody needs to mute themselves.
Yep, I think.
Okay, great. Thanks. Thanks, Reed.
The surrounding area is served by several modes of public transit.
Something went wrong when we issued your ticket. Further assistance.
I don't know who is
who
is able to be heard right now, but let's just ask our tech folks behind the scenes here to see if we can mute everybody and maybe have Sarit continue on.
Thank you. The surrounding area is served by several modes of public transit. The Q18, Q19, Q102, and Q103 buses run along 27th Avenue with service to Astoria, Maspeth, Flushing, Roosevelt Island, and Hunters Point, respectively. The Astoria Boulevard and 30th Street subway stations with access to the N&W lines are located approximately 1 mile east and southeast of the project area, respectively. The Astoria stop of the New York City Ferry is approximately 0.4 miles south of the project area with service to Long Island City, East 34th Street, and Wall Street. A city bike station is located on 27th Avenue and 3rd Street, approximately 1 block south of the project area. Next slide, please. The surrounding area of the Hallett's Peninsula is predominantly mapped with non-contextual residential districts. Our 6 districts encompass the majority of the peninsula south of 26th Avenue, including the Astoria Houses campus with the ferry stop to the south. Our 7-3 districts are mapped to the east and southwest on the future Astoria Cove and Helots Point development sites. Commercial overlays are mapped along 26th Avenue to the east and west of the project area and 1 block south, extending the length of 27th Avenue on the peninsula. The project area is within a 2-block M11 district that encompasses the Airport Enterprise Technology Warehouse to the west. M11 districts allow for up to 1 FAR of commercial and light manufacturing uses and up to 2.4 FAR of limited community facility uses. Buildings in M11 districts may have a maximum street wall height of 2 stories or 30 feet, whichever is less, before setting back and continuing to rise pursuant to a sky exposure plane. Parking in M11 districts varies by use. Next slide, please. The proposed project area consists of the entirety of Block 911 in Queens, which includes 2 contiguous tax lots, Lot 1 and 49, 3rd Street, a map street that the applicant owns and is proposing to remove from the city map, and the area between Block 911, Lot 49, and the bulkhead line. The project area has 200 feet of frontage on 26th Avenue, a 60-foot wide street to the south, approximately 300 feet of frontage along the East River to the north, and approximately 600 feet of frontage along both the Astoria Cove site to the east and Block 912 to the west. The project area includes the development site outlined in yellow and 1 non-applicant owned site, Block 911, Lot 49. The development site is an approximately 165,000 square foot L-shaped waterfront lot. The development site has been vacant since 2018 when it entered the New York State Department of Environmental Conservation's Brownfield Cleanup Program to remediate contaminated soil and groundwater. Prior to that, it had a 100-year history of heavy industrial operations, including as a steel processing facility, foundry, iron aggregate supplier, gas purifier, and most recently a lumber yard. Lot 49, the non-applicant owned site, has a lot area of approximately 35,000 square feet and is currently improved with a 2-story, approximately 28,000 square foot warehouse used to store furniture. The project area is located within the flood zone AE, which has a 1% annual chance of flooding and must comply with flood-resistant construction standards of the New York City Building Code. The project area has a base flood elevation of 14 feet and a design flood elevation of 17 feet. Next slide, please. Here you can see photos of the project area and surrounding area. Photo 1 shows a view of the development site looking southwest towards 3rd Street. Photos 2 and 3 show the 26th Avenue frontage of the development site and non-applicant owned site. Photo 4 shows a view of the development site looking west, and photo 5 shows a view of the project area's waterfront edge. Next slide, please. The actions would facilitate the development of a mixed-use building with 3 building segments that would contain a total of approximately 1 million square feet of floor area at 6 FAR, including 1,400 dwelling units, 1,800 square feet of commercial floor area, 22,000 square feet of community facility floor area, 525 accessory parking spaces, and approximately 1 acre of publicly accessible open space. The proposed development would also include 350 permanently affordable units pursuant to option 1 of the Mandatory Inclusionary Housing, or MIH, program. Next slide, please. The proposed development would consist of 3 building segments that increase in height as the development approaches the East River waterfront. Segment 1 would front 26th Avenue and rise to a maximum height of 238 feet, or 23 stories, above a building base of 130 feet, or 13 stories. Segment 2 would be located along 3rd Street and rise to a maximum height of 318 feet, or 31 stories, above a 240-foot, or 25-story section of the building. Segment 3 would be located at the end of 3rd Street facing the East River and rise to a maximum height of 350 feet, or 34 stories, above a 110-foot, or 10-story building base. Given the long facade, the applicants have employed strategies such as setbacks along 3rd Street to break up the massing and create more of an undulating effect on the facade. Non-residential uses would be located at the base of the building, concentrated along 26th Avenue to provide amenities and retail to the surrounding area. Due to the project area's location within the flood zone AE, the proposed development would be elevated approximately 8 to 9 feet such that it would be approximately 3 feet above the base flood elevation. Next slide, please. This massing shows another view of the proposed development looking north from 26th Avenue that illustrates how the tower heights increase towards the waterfront. Next slide, please. The building base would contain a mix of residential and non-residential uses. Fronting 26th Avenue, segment 1 would contain 1,800 square feet of retail on the ground floor and 16,000 square feet of community facility space on the second story. The community facility space would be tenanted by Zone 126, a community-based nonprofit whose mission is to connect the local community and schools in a shared vision for addressing educational issues and ending generational poverty. Urban Upbound, a workforce development nonprofit that provides services to underserved youth and adults, would be the second proposed community facility tenant in segment 1. They would house their worker cooperative program that incubates and trains local worker-owned businesses in the proposed development. The northern portion of the ground floor of segment 2 would contain a 5,500 square foot community facility space intended to be occupied by a physical therapy tenant. The southern portion of segment 2's ground floor would include townhome-style residential units with garden stoops and entrances that open directly onto 3rd Street. The ground floor of building segment 3 would include a 7,000 square foot lounge for building residents in the eastern portion facing the waterfront. A 525 space accessory parking garage in the cellar through 3rd floor of the interior portions of segments 1 through 3 would be accessed by a 25-foot curb cut on 26th Avenue and an entrance on 3rd Street between segments 2 and 3. The parking garage would also include 525 accessory bicycle parking spaces. A 50-foot loading zone would also be included in front of the residential entrance to segment 1 on 3rd Street. Next slide, please. The proposed development would contain approximately 1 acre of publicly accessible areas that would be equivalent to 20% of the development site's lot area being developed in each phase. The publicly accessible areas would consist of a waterfront esplanade that runs along the entire length of the development site, fronting the East River, and would be accessed by an upland connection and roundabout that extends along 3rd Street to an entrance on 26th Avenue. Next slide, please. The open space would be accessed via a plaza with terraced seating and retail at the intersection of 26th Avenue and 3rd Street. Next slide, please. The upland connection type 2, connecting the waterfront esplanade with 26th Avenue, would be coterminous with 3rd Street and include a 2-way, 50-foot wide unmapped street for pedestrian and vehicular use. 2 pedestrian sidewalks between 13.5 and 14.5 feet wide would flank the roadway and include bench seating and planting strips that would collect stormwater runoff. The upland connection would contain 12,800 square feet. 3rd Street would terminate with a 70-foot wide roundabout that would be separated by boulder bollards from the rest of the waterfront public access area. Next slide, please. The waterfront esplanade would contain approximately 14,000 square feet of shore public walkway and 11,000 square feet of supplemental public access area. The shore public walkway would include oyster-shaped rain gardens, terraced and turfed seating areas along the waterfront, and 5 fitness stations. The esplanade would also contain pedestrian seating and companion seating along the perimeters with open social spaces. Next slide, please. The proposed development would introduce a diverse planting palette, including street and canopy trees along 3rd Street, seaward plantings, a meadow plant mix, and rain garden plant mixes, which will diversify the waterfront area. Next slide, please. The actions will include a zoning map amendment from an M11 district to an R73 C24 zoning district, a zoning text amendment to map a mandatory inclusionary housing area, a waterfront special permit to waive height, setback, tower size, and maximum width of walls facing the shoreline pursuant to zoning resolution section 62-837A. Waterfront authorizations to modify requirements within the waterfront public access area pursuant to zoning resolution section 62-822A and 62-822B. And a waterfront authorization for phased development of the waterfront access area pursuant to zoning resolution section 62-822C. The final action is a city map amendment to demap the portion of 3rd Street between 26th Avenue and the East River. Also of note is that the proposed development would be classified as a large-scale general development. While no large-scale general development actions are being sought, certain exemptions of parking and mechanical space will be applied. The floor space used for the proposed 525 off-street parking spaces, which will be provided not more than 33 feet above the base plane, would not be counted as floor area pursuant to zoning resolution section 62454. Next slide, please. The first action is a zoning map amendment. The applicant proposes a zoning map amendment to rezone the entire project area from an M11 zoning district to an R73 C24 zoning district. The transition from an M11 district to an R73 C24 district would be consistent with the surrounding context and promote mixed-use development with affordable housing and job creation on an underutilized property. The proposed R73 C24 zoning map amendment would permit a wide variety of uses, including residential, commercial, and community facility uses. R73 zoning permits new medium-density residential and community facility development with a maximum FAR of 6.0 in an MIH area. R73 zoning districts permit a maximum base height of 65 feet with a maximum building height of 185 feet in MIH areas. Off-street parking is required for 50% of the building's dwelling units, with an exemption for income-restricted units within the transit zone. C24 commercial overlays permit up to 2 FAR of local commercial uses, such as retail and restaurants, in a standalone commercial building and ground floor commercial use in a mixed-use development. Next slide, please. The second action is a zoning text amendment. The applicant proposes to establish a new MIH area in Queens Community District 1 in Appendix F of the zoning resolution. Pursuant to the MIH program, the applicant is proposing to map MIH Option 1. Option 1 requires affordable housing to be provided equivalent to 25% of the residential floor area developed at an average of 60% of the area median income, with 10% at 40% of the area median income. Next slide, please. The third action is a special permit pursuant to zoning resolution section 62837A. Special permit 62837A for bulk and parking modifications on waterfront blocks permits the commission to modify applicable yard, lot coverage, height and setback, and distance between buildings for development on waterfront blocks to achieve a superior site plan and protect natural features while not adversely affecting access to light and air on surrounding waterfront public access areas, streets, and properties. Next slide, please. The special permit to waive height and setback requirements for waterfront blocks would foster a better site plan comprised of slab and point towers that will break up and articulate the proposed building mass and concentrate height towards the waterfront rather than 26th Avenue and the surrounding neighborhood. Next slide, please. The first set of special permit waivers that the applicant is seeking relate to height and setback. The proposed development would be subject to the height and setback requirements applicable to waterfront blocks, including that buildings fronting on narrow streets may rise to a maximum base height of 65 feet before a 15-foot setback is required from the street line and a setback of 30 feet is required from a shore public walkway. For the purposes of height and setback regulations, 3rd Street as an upland connection would be considered a narrow street. The image on the left illustrates the extent of areas that the applicant will be seeking height and setback waivers for. The second set of waivers the applicant will be seeking relate to tower floor plate size. Per regulations applicable to waterfront blocks, each residential story of a building located entirely above the maximum base height of 65 feet may not exceed an area of 8,100 square feet, including exemptions. The image on the right illustrates the areas that the applicant will be seeking tower floor plate waivers for. I will now provide additional information about how these waivers would be applied to each building segment. Next slide, please. For segment 1, the applicant is requesting to waive the following requirements, including maximum setback and base height regulations in connection with 3rd Street, a narrow street. At a height of 65 feet, segment 1 would set back 5 feet from 3rd Street up to a height of 200 feet. Segment 1 would then set back 10 feet from 3rd Street for the remainder of the building height. The applicant is also requesting to increase the maximum permitted building height from 185 to 238 feet. And lastly, the applicant is requesting to waive maximum tower size regulations on floors 6 through 23 above the maximum base height to permit floor plates up to 19,000 square feet. Next slide, please. For segment 2, the applicant is requesting to waive the following requirements, including maximum setback and base height regulations in connection with 3rd Street. At a height of 65 feet, segment 2 would set back 9 feet from 3rd Street up to a height of 300 feet. Segment 2 would then set back at least 19 feet from 3rd Street for the remainder of the building height. The applicant is also requesting to increase the permitted maximum building height from 185 to 318 feet. And lastly, the applicant is requesting to waive maximum tower size regulations on floors 6 through 31 above the maximum base height to permit floor plates up to 27,000 square feet. Next slide, please. For segment 3, the applicant is requesting to waive the following requirements, including maximum setback and base height regulations in connection with the shore public walkway. At a height of 65 feet, segment 3 would not set back the required 30 feet from the shore public walkway up to a height of approximately 350 feet. The applicant is also requesting to increase the permitted maximum building height from 185 to 350 feet. And lastly, the applicant is requesting to waive maximum tower size regulations on floors 7 through 34 above the maximum base height to permit floor plates up to 41,000 square feet. Next slide, please. In segment 3, the applicant is also seeking to increase the maximum width of walls facing the shoreline from 100 to 275 feet. Next slide, please. The 4th and 5th actions are waterfront authorizations pursuant to zoning resolution section 62-822A and 62-822B. The applicant is seeking waterfront authorizations to facilitate a superior site plan that promotes a unique design and a planted upland connection with pedestrian and vehicular access. The authorizations would also allow the applicants to overcome site planning constraints, which include flood resilient construction and proactive strategies for stormwater management. Next slide, please. The first waterfront authorization pursuant to zoning resolution section 62-822A permits modification of requirements for location, area, and minimum dimensions of waterfront public access areas and visual corridors that comply with the required minimum dimensions for waterfront public access areas and provide equivalent public use and enjoyment. Next slide, please. Pursuant to zoning resolution sections 62-822A, the applicant proposes to modify the WPAA regulations by raising the visual corridor base plane to permit resilient construction and modifying the widths of the upland connection walkway, transition area, and supplemental public access area. Next slide, please. The second waterfront authorization pursuant to zoning resolution section 62-822B permits modification of requirements of waterfront public access areas that would result in an equivalent or superior design. Next slide, please. Pursuant to zoning resolution 62-822B, the applicant seeks a series of modifications to the waterfront public access area or WPAA to allow vehicular access on a planted upland connection. These modifications, such as permitting vehicle access, include modifications such as permitting vehicle access, delineating the vehicular area by boulders, modifying tree pit width, and reducing the pedestrian clear path. Next slide, please. Other modifications to permit an equivalent or superior site plan relate to reducing lawn requirements, shifting the bike rack locations, and modifying lighting requirements. Next slide, please. The sixth action is an authorization pursuant to zoning resolution section 62-822C for establishing a phasing plan. Pursuant to zoning resolution section 62-822, the City Planning Commission may authorize a phasing plan to implement waterfront public access area or WPAA improvements on zoning lots undergoing partial development. To grant such authorization, an applicant must demonstrate that the amount of WPAA developed in each phase is proportionate to the lot area being developed in each phase. Pursuant to Zoning Resolution Section 6257C, 20% of the lot area on the development site must be a waterfront public access area, and 20% of the lot area must be developed as a WPAA in each phase of development. The proposed development would proceed pursuant to a three-phased construction plan. Phase 1 would facilitate 250,000 square feet of development, including 299 housing units, including 75 permanently affordable units, which would account for 25% of the total development's floor area. The applicant would provide approximately 21,000 square feet of the WPAA, equivalent to 49% of the total in Phase 1. Phase 2 would facilitate 311,000 square feet of development, including 510 housing units, including 128 permanently affordable units, which would account for 32% of the total development's floor area and bring the development to 56% complete. During Phase 2, the applicant would provide approximately 20,000 square feet of the WPAA, equivalent to 20% of the total WPAA, bringing the WPAA to 70% complete. Phase 3 would facilitate 426,000 square feet of development, including 591 housing units, including 148 permanently affordable units, which would account for 43% of the total development's floor area and bring the development to 100% complete. During Phase 3, the applicant would provide approximately 13,000 square feet of the waterfront public access area, equivalent to 30% of the total WPAA, bringing the WPAA to 100% complete. Next slide, please. The seventh and final action is an amendment to the city map. The applicant is seeking an amendment to the city map to demap the portion of 3rd Street extending approximately 525 feet north from its intersection with 26th Avenue. 3rd Street is a 50-foot wide narrow street that is privately owned by the applicant and was never improved nor open to the public. Demapping 3rd Street would allow it to become an upland connection type 2 that would provide access to the waterfront esplanade and include plantings and pedestrian amenities. While 3rd Street would be removed from the city map, its design and function as a driveway and upland connection type 2 would be locked in through a restrictive declaration. Next slide, please. A notice of completion for a draft environmental impact statement was issued on March 25th, 2022. The analysis found the potential for significant adverse impacts in the categories listed here. No other significant adverse impacts were identified. Mitigation measures are identified in the DEIS and will be further studied between the draft and final EIS. Next slide, please. In conclusion, the applicant is proposing a series of land use actions to facilitate approximately 1 million square feet of development, including approximately 1,400 residential units, including 350 affordable units, 1,800 square feet of commercial space, 23,000 square feet of community facility space, and 1 acre of publicly accessible open space in Astoria Community Board 1, Queens. That concludes my presentation. Prior to taking any questions, I would like to note that while the Queens office generally supports this project, the constrained L-shaped site, coupled with the proposed FAR, results in towers that are thicker and chunkier than the surrounding proposed developments and creates a crowded building configuration across the site that limits porosity from the upland towards the waterfront, which is an important principle in bringing the community down to a new waterfront resource. The Queen's office is happy to work with the applicant as the public review process advances for this project and the community weighs in and shares their comments and feedback on the proposed actions. I'm now happy to take any questions.
Thank you very much, Sarit, and thank you for a complete and detailed presentation here. I was actually going to ask you about that point that you raised at the end, because the massing here does look pretty snug. As I understand it, this is proposed to be an R73, much like the other sites that were previously done at Astoria Cove and Hallett's Point, but it's on a much smaller space. Can you just put that into some context for us? This is also 986,000 square feet. Like, what what was fit onto each of those other recent ones? If you have that at your disposal, would be interested.
Sure. So, to put this into context, the surrounding sites were rezoned as well to R73 C24. However, Astoria Cove directly to the east is a 9-acre site, which is, more than twice the size of this property, which is 4 acres. And Hallett's Point is several times the size at 34 acres, extending the entire western edge of the peninsula and into the kind of southern portion of the peninsula as well. So these are quite different scales overall when thinking about the amount of floor area that is being kind of fit into this site, which is why there is this resulting kind of constrained configuration of the 3 towers that I noted. And then I think you also asked just in terms of kind of overall amount of floor area. So with the adjacent sites, it is, 1.7 million square feet at Hallett's Point, and it's escaping me now, 1.7 million at Astoria Cove and 2.7 at Hallett's Point.
Okay, got it. Okay, and presumably that chunkiness or that jamming it into the L shape, that is where these waivers for segment 1, segment 2, and segment 3 come in. That's really where one would look to address those particular concerns. Is that right?
That's correct. So essentially, to achieve the full 6 FAR permitted by the R73 zoning, the applicants are seeking a series of waivers as I step through for the 3 building segments, and kind of limiting the kind of extent of waivers would be kind of a potential path forward for kind of reducing the overall constraint massing that we are currently observing.
Okay, got it. Well, look, big picture, this is a big and important site and development, and we appreciate the interest in doing something big in New York. But you are also correct, I think, to point out that the site has some limitations, and we should certainly work with the applicant here to try to get it right. But we're just at the beginning of this phase today, so we'll have plenty of time for that. Let me see if there are other questions here from commissioners. Commissioner Levin.
Yes, thank you. Actually, I have a series of questions, but I guess starting with, to pick up where we left off here, we've got 2 large sites on either side of this that we worked on pretty attentively a while ago, yet we've just had 1 building built. Are there any lessons to be learned from the development efforts associated with Hallett's Point and with Astoria Cove that we should be applying here? Or are we looking at a zoning that might not, I mean, I guess I don't want to say that Hallett's Point and Astoria Cove aren't going to happen, but they haven't happened, and may have some problems associated with them that we should understand before applying exactly the same zoning all over again here. I mean, we want to see this area developed effectively. Is this the best way to do it?
Commissioner Levin, I appreciate the question and concern that you're expressing. I think I will point out a couple things that the commission may not be aware of, which is that Hallett's Point did recently undergo an updated waterfront certification. So there are steps being taken there towards advancing development. And then as far as Astoria Cove is concerned, there have been some conversations with the applicant about certain follow-up actions needed for them to advance their work as well, although that is not moving forward as expediently.
Okay, well, maybe we'll learn more about that as we go. Oh,
I would like to elaborate upon that a little bit as well. In the case of Hallett's Point, as Sarit has helpfully pointed out, we did go through the process of a new waterfront certification. One of the things really driving that was the fact that we were finding that as the resiliency numbers became more updated, that there were ways in which we could actually create a more resilient waterfront in its sort of finished design. In addition to that, there had to be some additional coordination with agencies such as DEP, where there was a little bit of a disconnect between the design and the feasibility for DEP to be building out some of their very large equipment within that area. And so those were sort of the drivers in that case in terms of the new waterfront certification. The other part was that the Hallett's project, the Hallett's Point project, has had a change in ownership, and that ownership also wanted to be able to pursue a change in the phasing so that they could actually be advancing some more of their inland buildings that are some of the affordable housing components of that proposal in the near term, rather than having to wait for all of their waterfront sites to be complete in advance of that. So we have certainly seen some positive movement happening on that front, and they've been working very closely with parks as well in terms of some of the larger capital needs for the peninsula. So, you know, I certainly, again, appreciate you sharing this concern. We do certainly see that as this peninsula is sort of changing its types of uses from what had been some of these traditionally manufacturing uses to residential uses, it does take a little bit more energy and know-how and expense on the part of these developers. But we do think that they're making some positive inroads on that front.
Okay. So two more topics, if I may. One has to do with 3rd Street and the other one has to do with schools. So they're looking to demap 3rd Street, which hasn't ever functioned as a street anyway. And that, I guess, has the advantage of giving them some extra floor area. But that also exacerbates the sort of packing the density issue that you referred to before. So maybe that's something that we look at going forward. But I have to say that the renderings you showed of the treatment of 3rd Street make it look like just another street. Basically, it doesn't really look so much like an upland connection. It's full of cars. And I'm wondering if we've applied the best thinking about pedestrianizing a street that is admittedly going to be used for cars because they have to access the parking garage, but it, you know, does it need to have curbs? Can it have, you know, pedestrian emphasizing, upland connection emphasizing features rather than features that make it look just like a street? I'm sure your urban design people have been thinking about that, and I look forward to hearing more when it comes back. And then finally, do I remember correctly that in Astoria Cove, there was discussions about citing a school within that project? The EIS for this project lays out some pretty stark numbers for school overcrowding. There's a deficit of more than 15. There will be with this project a deficit of more than 1,500 school seats. That's way a lot. Have commitments been made in these other projects that aren't getting built that we're depending on to make this one successful? And if those aren't going to happen, what can we do for a school? And I'm done.
Thank you for your comments, Commissioner Levin. I will just confirm that there is a public school and intermediate school proposed for Hallett's Point, as well as a public elementary school proposed for Astoria Cove, and that the applicants are in conversations with the School Construction Authority to advance mitigation conversations related to the school's impact.
Great. Thank you very much, Commissioner Levin. Let me go to Commissioner Cerullo.
Thank you, Chairman. Just a quick question, and I realize that this is, you know, early in the process, but I'm particularly sensitive to the public realm portion of sort of the design and the plan, and I just wonder if at this point we understand the structure of how the maintenance and care of what is obviously in the rendering very beautiful sort of public realm amenities related to this development? How we know that will be working? Who is responsible? Is there a plan in place or cost associated with this beyond the developers themselves? So just wondering about that.
So I don't think, we can't speak to the cost at this point of the operational needs of the maintenance, but there kind of will be a restrictive declaration developed and reviewed and supported by the Department of Parks and Recreation.
So the restrictive declaration will be obviously with the developer, but Parks will be participating in the development of that deck?
That's right, Commissioner. So this is our standard waterfront requirements for maintenance and operation. All of them get signed off by Parks Department, who is sort of the maintenance of last resort is usually how it works, although there is an option for them to sort of acquire and take it over, but that rarely happens. So the developer will be obligated to maintain these to a specific standard that sort of is laid out in the restrictive deck.
And I could assume, am I correct to assume that either could be done directly by the developer or through some contract, but it would be their obligation to ensure that the maintenance was.
That's right. That's right.
Understood. Yeah. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Commissioner Cerullo. Commissioner Rampersad.
Thank you. A lot of the questions I had or concerns were raised by both Commissioner Levin and Commissioner Cerullo. One of the additional comments I just want to make is with regards to 3rd Street, I'm assuming the applicant team will have to go through FDNY for access, right? And I guess the other thing I was going to ask was, were there any other configurations that were explored by the applicant team before they ended up with what we see today?
So I'll confirm first that the FDNY kind of sign off and access is being pursued, and I believe has already been obtained or is close to that. And I will actually defer to Alexis to talk more about any prior configurations that were discussed in the past.
Certainly, thank you. For the most part, this has been focused on trying to create something that felt like a traditional street for a sense of safety between vehiculars and pedestrians, but still have some areas where some of those boundaries could be broken down with the use or application of, say, more natural elements such as boulders instead of bollards, just to give a little bit more sense of seamlessness across the public realm. But we definitely also appreciate hearing the suggestion that Commissioner Levin made before about how to kind of further push the bounds of how this can feel even more pedestrianized. And so that's certainly something that we can be working with the applicant on through the ULURP process. And we're certainly open to any further suggestions from the commission as well.
Thank you, Commissioner. Okay, great. Alexis, Sarit, I think those are the questions that we have for you. We know that this is going to be more conversation down the line, but we appreciate your presentation. You're answering those questions. This matter is now certified, and we will move on to our next item on the agenda. Ryan.
Right. Thank you. The third item on our agenda is a certification of a zoning map and zoning text amendments in the Bronx, Community District 10. Our presenter is Alexandra Patty-Diaz.
Good afternoon, commissioners. This is the Bruckner site's rezoning, seeking to facilitate 4 new developments to produce approximately 339 housing units, local retail, office, and community space in the Bronx. Next, the applicant Neck Associates LLC seeks a zoning map amendment and a zoning text amendment to map a new MH area. Next, in Schuylerville neighborhood, Community District 10 in the Bronx. The overall project area is located on the northern side of Bruckner Boulevard between Crosby Avenue to the east and Valco Avenue to the west. Next. The northern project area is composed of 3 blocks located between Crosby Avenue to the east and Revere Avenue to the west. Next. Bruckner Boulevard is a wide street that runs east-west, and it is separated by the Bruckner Expressway, my apologies, which runs below at its center. Although the surrounding area is located outside the transit zone, it is well served by public transit. Next, East Tremont Avenue. It's a wide street that runs north-south across the project area, and it is an important commercial corridor of the neighborhood. It connects to Morris Park, which is a major job center located on the north, and additionally 2 bus lines run along that ensures a prompt access to the nearest subway station, which is Middletown Road, 8 minutes away of the project area, and this connects to Thrust Neck and River Park Towers. Next, Crosby Avenue is a wide street that runs north-south at the edge of the project area, where another bus lines run along, bringing connections also between Locust Point and Williamsbridge. Next. Important community resources are located in the surrounding area, such as PSX 014, Senator John Calandra, the St. Benedict Roman Catholic Church. Recently, in 2020, the Thrust Neck bid was mapped along East Tremont Avenue, and the project area is close also to the Old Saint Raymond Cemetery. Next. The southern project area is composed of several lots that front Bruckner Boulevard between Balkan Avenue and Quincy Avenue. Next. Land uses in the surrounding area are predominantly residential and commercial, concentrated along portions of Bruckner Boulevard and East Tremont Avenue. Residential uses are generally consist of low-rise 1 and 2 family and multifamily walk-up buildings. Zoning districts in the surrounding area include R7A, R4, R41, R4A, R3A C21, R3A C22, R4A C21, and R4A C22. The area is located within a fresh zone, and it was also part of the 2004 Thrust Neck area rezoning, which changed from R4 to the current contextual R4 zoning districts that are existing today. And it also added the Bronx Community District 10 to the list of areas governed by the lower density growth management area regulations. Next. Now I will walk you through the development sites and its proposed projects to facilitate one by one. So development site A is located at 2945 Bruckner Boulevard, and it is a corner lot located in the intersection between Bruckner Boulevard and Crosby Avenue with an area of approximately 103,000 square feet. Next. It is recently occupied with a 1-story grocery store on the site, as well as accessory parking. Next. The proposed development will contain a new 8-story mixed residential and commercial building with approximately 142,000 square feet of floor area. It will reach a total of 8 stories, in which also include 10-foot setbacks above the base height of 65 feet. The first floor will contain approximately 17,000 square feet of grocery store, which will replace the existing grocery store in place. And the rest of the floors will contain approximately 139 dwelling units, of which 41 will be permanently affordable. It also includes approximately 190 enclosed and unenclosed parking spaces on grade and in the center. Next. Development site B is comprised of several lots on block 5309, a corner lot located in the intersection between Bruckner Boulevard and Edison Avenue with an area of approximately 28,000 square feet. Next, it is currently occupied with vacant commercial and residential uses, as well as a vacant fence lots. Next, the proposed development in Site B will contain a new 5-story mixed-use residential and commercial building with approximately 101,000 square feet of floor area. The first floor will contain approximately 23,000 square feet of community center and recreational facility for youth, which will include an early childhood education facility, as well as recreational space, such as batting cages. There will be a space also for local retail. The rest of the floors will contain approximately 114 dwelling units, of which approximately 34 will be permanently affordable. It will also include 75 parking spaces. Next. Development Site C comprise several lots of block 5307, a corner lot located in the intersection between Bruckner Boulevard and Revere Avenue with approximately 70,000 square feet of lot area. Next, the site is currently vacant, fenced off, and overgrown. Next, and the applicant proposes a new 8-story mixed residential and commercial building with approximately 63,000 square feet of floor area. The building will reach a total height of 8 stories, of which also include 15-foot setbacks above the base height. The first floor will contain approximately 13,000 square feet of professional office space, and the rest of the floors will contain approximately 64 dwelling units, of which approximately 19 will remain permanently affordable. It also includes 29 parking spaces. Next. Development Site D is comprised of several lots on block 5307, an irregular shaped lot located on the northern side of Bruckner Boulevard between Balkan and Quincy Avenues with approximately 70,000 square feet of lot area. Next, the site is currently vacant, fenced off, and overgrown. Next, and the applicant is proposing a new 3-story residential building with approximately 16,000 square feet of floor area, producing 22 dwelling units. It also includes 9 parking spaces. Next. In order to facilitate these developments, the applicant is requesting a zoning map amendment to change an existing lower density district, R4A C2, C12, R4A, R41, C24, and R41 districts to a contextual medium district, which is R6A, C24, and R6A. And it also is proposing to change from an existing lower density districts R41 and R2 and R5 contextual lower density district. Next. Coterminus of the northern project area, which corresponds to the change to an R6A district between Crosby Avenue and Revere Avenues, the applicant is proposing to modify Appendix F of the zoning resolution to establish an MIH area. Next. And a following action that the commission will see in an upcoming review session is a change on the city map that will help to facilitate the development in Site B. This change is to demap a map privately owned, unbuilt street located on Mayors Street between Edison and East Tremont Avenues. Together with these proposed land use actions, the development of Site B will be possible. Next, That concludes my presentation, and now I'm happy to answer any questions.
Excellent. Thank you, as always, Alexandra. Just to the context for a moment. The area that surrounds these sites, particularly going above the Bruckner on the map, actually that may be west, but in the area on your map just above the sites, that's predominantly R4, R4A, R3A. Can you say a little bit more about the appropriateness of R6A on Bruckner and how you would rationalize that as we go forward here?
Yes. So in terms of land use and context, and then I will pass it to Carol and Sean to talk about like the history of the area. But in terms of land use and context, we're looking here to as blocks and lots that are fronting a very wide street, which is kind of like our first approach to areas where we are more, where a change from lower density to medium density buildings are appropriate from an urban design perspective. And then if we take a look into the land use, this is very close to commercial, an important commercial corridor of the neighborhood, such as East Redmond Avenue. But at the same time, its proximity to public transit and how it is well served by different bus lanes that very efficiently connect the residents of this area to also other modes of transportation, all together make us believe that these are appropriate locations for a change from lower to density districts. Now I'll pass it along to Carol and Sean to talk about the history of the area, if appropriate.
Great.
Maybe we should engage Ryan Singer, who was a project manager at one time. I would just add, the rezoning, the contextual rezoning that was applied in the broader neighborhood was what I believe was in 2004, was the latest, and almost 20 years ago. And I think just to reiterate a bit of what Alexandra was saying, is looking in these low density neighborhoods that have been well preserved, that have not seen a lot of growth in general, which we could talk about more at a later date, is to find a location at the intersection of two very wide streets, at the intersection of a very important commercial corridor. It allows us to have growth in this low density neighborhood at the same time that we preserve the lower density side streets. And it's not unusual to have an R6A, which is a very modest district, at such a location. Sean, is there anything else you would add?
No, I think that's right. And you have the relatively new business improvement district that's right along Fremont Avenue there, and it's an important commercial corridor. These are really, really wide streets to go out there, especially at the intersection of where the grocery store is on Bruckner there. And that's where the largest building proposed here is. It certainly makes a lot of sense on that intersection, kind of brings it all together there.
Okay, great. Thank you. Let's see if we have any other questions here. I see none. So thank you all, Alexandra and Bronx team. We appreciate it. We will see you further on this one. And with that, the Bruckner Sites rezoning is certified, and we're going to go to some Bronx pre-hearings next. Ryan?
Certainly. Let the record show that I was only 10 years old when I was a project manager. The fourth item on our agenda is a pre-hearing review of a site selection and special permit in the Bronx Community District 4. And our presenter is Manny Lagares.
Good afternoon, commissioners. This is the new facility for EMS Station 17 coming back for pre-hearing review. Next slide, please. The site is located at 1257 Morris Avenue in the Concourse neighborhood. The site is a city-owned lot that is vacant and currently used by the adjacent fire department firehouse for additional parking. A site selection action is needed because of the proposed new use on the site, as well as the capital investment. The site requires a special permit to allow this EMS use in a residential neighborhood. Next slide, please. The site, which is outlined in blue, is approximately 15,000 square feet. Just to the north is the firehouse, which you can see the red wall of the firehouse. Next slide, please. Here is a photo of the site from Morris Avenue looking northwest. Next slide, please. And here is a photo of the site looking in the other direction from Morris Avenue looking southwest. Next slide, please. As you will recall at certification, the current location for EMS 17 is at 1080 Ogden Avenue in an old firehouse that is inadequate to EMS's needs. This existing site has been proposed for a new community facility use to be developed in consultation with Community Board 4 and other local stakeholders as part of the Bronx Borough Jail Plan. Next slide, please. The Community Board voted unanimously in favor of the application 3100 with conditions, which included that the city issue the RFP for the new use at 1080 Ogden Avenue and include the Community Board in developing the RFP. They also requested that the city utilize local contractors and subcontractors for this development. The borough president approved the application. Next slide, please. Here is a rendering of the proposed EMS facility. The Public Design Commission has reviewed this project and approved this design. That concludes my presentation. I'm very happy to answer any questions you may have.
Thanks very much, Manny.
You're welcome.
Let me see if there are questions here. Commissioner Burney.
Oh, thank you. Just a quick question, Manny. The question about the city issuing an RFP for the old firehouse, I wonder if there was a response to that from DCAS, because I do recall when they closed Engine 204 in Brooklyn in 2006, and the building is still lying vacant, unused, and the city hasn't acted on it. So I'm just wondering if you did get definitive plans from DCAS as to repurposing the old building.
No, I haven't seen any new plans, but I can just follow up with DCAS just to have the information for you.
Okay, thank you.
You're very welcome.
Thank you, Commissioner. All right. Thanks very much, Manny. I think you may have another one, so we'll see if we let you off the hook quickly here or not. Ryan, let's go to the next one on our list.
Yeah, the fifth item on our agenda, it's a pre-hearing review of a zoning map and zoning text amendment in the Bronx Community District 12. And Manny, as you said, will present again.
Okay. This is a pre-hearing for a zoning map amendment and a zoning text amendment by a private applicant, Centerland Realty LLC, to facilitate the legalization of an existing vacant building located at 1930 AD Avenue. Next slide, please. The applicant requests a zoning map amendment from R4 to R6B and a zoning text amendment designating the rezoning area as an MIH area to facilitate a daycare center. Next slide, please. The project area is located in the Baychester section of Bronx Community District 12 in the Northeast Bronx. Next slide, please. This area map shows the predominant residential character of the surrounding area, which is 2- and 3-story attached and detached homes. To the south of the proposed project area are several 1- and 2-story transportation utility uses, including an auto repair center. Next slide, please. Here is a photo of the development site, which contains a building constructed in 1948. This building is not in conformance with the R4 district front and side yard regulations, FAR, and lot coverage. In addition, the building was enlarged without the necessary DOB permits. DOB has issued violations. Next slide, please. Here is a photo of the rest of the project area, which basically consists of 3 lots that contain 3-story attached residential buildings. Next slide, please. The image on the left shows the current zoning designation in and around the project area. The image on the right shows the establishment of the R6B zoning. The R6B district has a 2.0 FAR, 2.2 with MIH, and allows community facility use. No side or front yards are required. Next slide, please. This slide shows the project area mapped as an MIH area. The applicant has selected options 1 and 2 in the event that the 4 lots become available for future development. However, he is only proposing a daycare center at the development site and has expressed no interest in any residential construction. Next slide, please. Bronx Community Board 12 voted unanimously in favor of this application with conditions. The conditions are that the adjacent residential homes be excluded from the zoning change because it will allow for future residential development up to a height of 50 feet. The community board has also requested that a restrictive declaration be instituted for the purpose of limiting development only to developments to the development site and for use as a daycare center only. Next slide, please. Okay, and this is the rendering, and the commission recalls this rendering when I presented it back December 13 of last year. And as you will recall, there were issues that the commissioners had. I conveyed that information to the applicant, and the applicant is working on the new rendering. And we also provided them with urban design guidelines that they can follow. These are similar to the ones that we used to apply to the applicants that were coming in, the city-owned leases for daycare centers. So at Wednesday's presentation, they should have something to show the commission. I'd be very happy to take any questions.
Great, thank you very much. Manny, just a couple of quick follow-ups.
Sure.
So the point here is to legalize the daycare center, which is right now, it's non-compliant. But the applicant here is proposing a mapping to R6B.
Mm-hmm.
So just play this out for us for a moment. We know that they intend to do a daycare center, but as we're seeing here and in other applications, you know, we don't control everything here at the City Planning Commission. Once we have set the rules, the private industry is allowed to go and follow them.
Mm-hmm.
So would R6B here for residential be appropriate, even if a daycare center were to not emerge?
Okay, when applicants come to us initially for rezonings or special permits or other action, we sit down with them and we discuss various, they'll come in with, let's say, a proposal for a higher density, et cetera. And when we're meeting with them, we look at the location. First, this is a fronting on a wide street, which again, with quality housing for new residential development is something that's appropriate here, where it's something to be in the middle of the block that was sandwiched in by smaller homes that we would not support. So generally, if it's a corner lot, frontage with a wide street, and again, if the map that I had showed, where you have the 3-story detached homes, the homes just below going south of this development are 3 stories. And like the 3-story residential properties, they exceed the 0.75 FAR of the R4 zoning district. And I would say from what I recall of this application and then the numbers, it's a range of 1.06 to 1.69, which is pretty close to that 2.0 FAR that they will get for community facility use under the R6B. So our office it has no problem with this location for a higher density as a R6B.
Thank you.
You're
Vice
very
Chairman.
welcome.
Thank you, Chair. Manny, for the hearing on Wednesday, I'd like to know more about the proposed daycare center and specifically who would operate it. I assume Centerline is a real estate developer. And I think given the residential concentration here, a daycare center would be very much appreciated and utilized. But I'd like to know about who they contemplate to run this daycare center.
Yes, we know the information. It's St. Jemuel Daycare Center, and they operate the daycare centers in Community District Number 7. And there is interesting in having an operation there also.
St. Jemuel.
Exactly, yes.
Okay. Well, the more they could say about St. Jemuel, the better.
Sure.
Okay.
No problem. I will convey that information.
It's
to
not
them.
often, at least, from my perspective, that we've seen standalone daycare centers that are new as opposed to renewals that go back 30, 40, 50 years.
Sure.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Vice Chairman. Commissioner Edie.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Thank you, Manny. Just following up Vice Chair Knuckles' question, do you know if there's a lease already in place, or is this something they contemplate?
A lease in place? No, I don't know. That's a good question. I will get back to you on this.
Okay.
Yes, I'll speak with the applicant's representatives.
Thank you very much.
You're very welcome.
Commissioner Levin.
Yes, thank you. Manny, does staff have any advice for us or guidance for us on the community board's request that we leave out the 3 multifamily buildings that are not involved in the applicant's plans? I think I can anticipate what the answer is, but I'd like to get like to have an understanding straight.
I'll defer to Sean on that. He seems to want to answer that.
Sure, and thanks, Commissioner Levin. And I think maybe I can expound upon Manny's earlier answer. Those homes today are actually overbuilt under the existing zoning, and so we'd be bringing them further into compliance, and we thought that's certainly a good reason to include that, and really taking that entire block front that fronts on the wide street on a D there.
Okay, so they wouldn't be considered soft sites if they're overbuilt. Are they more than 50% of what the zoning would be with the R6B?
They are not. Yeah, they're not considered soft sites. That's correct.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Levin. Okay, great. Thank you, Manny and the Bronx team. And this will go to a public hearing on Wednesday, as will the last one. I did not note that before, but both of the last 2 items, as well as the one that we're about to hear, will go to a public hearing this Wednesday. Ryan, do you want to bring in the final Bronx item?
The 6th item on our agenda is a pre-hearing review of a notice of intent to acquire office space in the Bronx Community District 4. And Manny will tell you about this one as well.
Okay, this is a pre-hearing for a 195 office space application for the Human Resources Administration's Bronx office for the Office of Child Support Services and Office of Legal Affairs. The proposed site is located at 810 River Avenue in Bronx Community District Number 4. Next slide, please. In 2018, the Family Court mandated HRA to set up the Office of Child Support Services, Office of Legal Affairs hubs in each borough of the city to provide child support services, either inside or in close proximity of the family courts, in order to facilitate the efficient movement of the high volume of case files. HRA set up a temporary location in the Bronx Family Court, but the space was too small to accommodate the full staff. In addition, the internet phone connectivity was very poor at that location, impeding the work of the units. During the pandemic, the unit worked remotely. Once the office has been built out, the unit expects that there will be at least 5 client visitors per day, and the office hours will be from Monday through Friday, 8 a.m. to 6 p.m. Next slide, please. Here's an area map showing the proposed location at 810 River Avenue, outlined in red, which is in the Bronx Civic Center area. It's a short walking distance from the family court and is well served by public transportation. Next slide, please. Okay, let me just, this is slide 4. Here is an aerial photo of the proposed location. HRA is proposing to locate its Bronx units to the 2nd floor of a mixed-use building, which is a short walk from the Bronx Family Court and is well served by public transportation. 810 River Avenue is outlined in yellow, and the Bronx Family Court is outlined in blue. Next slide, please. This map shows the walking distance between the 2 locations and additional transportation options. The area is well served by bus lines and the B and D and 4 subway lines. Next slide, please. Here is a photo of the building. The office space will be located on the 2nd floor. Next slide, please. And here is a photo of the River Avenue frontage with commercial retail space and the office lobby entrance. Next slide, please. And here is a photo of the raw space for the proposed office with the elevator on the right. Next slide, please. And here is the proposed floor plan space, which will be fully ADA accessible. Clients will enter from the main elevator area. The blue area is the receptionist waiting area. The green areas are staff-only spaces, and the pinkish area are staff work areas where staff may also meet with clients. Staff will be able to enter through the main entrance or via a rear staff-only entrance. There are no parking spaces associated with this office space application, although there is a paid public parking garage in the building. Staff and clients are encouraged to use public transportation. I'd be happy to answer any questions you might have.
Great. Thank you very much, Manny.
You're welcome.
I don't see any questions for you. Let me just give people a second. This one does not strike me as wildly controversial. Commissioner Marine. Commissioner?
Commissioner, it's, you can *6, I believe.
Yes.
On your phone.
No, I'm on. Yes.
Yeah.
So for quite some time, we've been discussing new buildings and community facilities within those new buildings and trying to understand the city's leasing policy and trying to get folks to move into these newer buildings that have newer technology, IT, and the whole gamut. And I happen to think, I want to opine that this is a really, to me, good application showing how the city is working with some of the new community facility spaces and engaging and bringing in tenants for the very same purpose of filling that community facility space. I'm glad it's happening here. I think that this is a very good use of the space. There are a lot of new buildings coming online, and those community facilities, the services being presented would be benefiting from these new community facilities. So I just want to say thank you, because it seems like there was an effort here to make that happen finally, and I'm very happy for that.
Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner. Great. And again, thank you, Manny, for all of these Bronx items today. We appreciate it. And this item will go to public hearing on Wednesday, and we'll look forward to that. Next, we're going to go to our Brooklyn pre-hearings. Ryan.
That's right. The 7th item on our agenda is a pre-hearing review of a UDAP designation and disposition of city-owned property in Brooklyn Community District 5. And Karina Leung is our presenter. Karina.
Hi, good afternoon, commissioners. This is as Ryan said, this is an application coming back for pre-hearing. Next slide. So this is an application by the New York City Department of Housing, Preservation and Development for a UDAP designation and approval, including disposition of city-owned property. This application would facilitate the development of 4 buildings that would collectively create 46 affordable rental units and approximately 1,800 square feet of commercial space. Next slide. The 4 project sites are located in the central part of East New York in Brooklyn Community District 5. I'll walk through each of the proposed developments, starting with the first site in the top left and then moving clockwise. Next slide. So the first site is a 5,000 square foot vacant city-owned lot on the south side of Glenmore Avenue, which is a narrow street. The site was zoned R5 until the 2016 East New York rezoning, when an R5B zoning district was mapped along Glenmore Avenue and the adjacent mid-blocks to preserve the lower scale residential character of the area. The proposed development would comply with this lower density contextual zoning and would include 6 dwelling units in a 3-story, 6,100 square foot building. Next slide. The second site is a 5,400 square foot vacant city-owned lot on the south side of Pitkin Avenue, which is a wide street with the AC subwide line running along it. Pitkin Avenue is one of the local commercial corridors that had been targeted for growth in the East New York rezoning. And so before the rezoning, it had been largely zoned R5 with commercial overlays that had high parking requirements. And in the rezoning, this corridor was then rezoned to R7A C24 and mapped with an enhanced commercial district to support transit-oriented development with active ground floor uses. MIH was also mapped on this site, requiring 25% of units to be permanently affordable to households at an average of 60% of AMI. The proposed development at the site would be an 8-story building with 26 units and approximately 22,000 square feet of residential space, and then it would have 1,800 square feet of commercial space on the ground floor. Next slide. The third site is a 5,400 square foot vacant city-owned lot that's located on the northwest corner of the intersection of Dumont Avenue and Ashford Street, which are both narrow streets. The proposed 6,700 square foot 3-story building will have 6 rental units. A mayoral zoning override was granted to waive one of the 2 required 10-foot front yards in order to facilitate a better site plan and a better layout of the units in the building. The proposed development is otherwise compliant with the R5 zoning that's in place on the site. Next slide. Site 4 is a 4,000 square foot vacant city-owned lot, also a corner lot. It's located at the intersection of Blake Avenue and Bradford Street, which are also narrow streets. The zoning here is R6, and the proposed 4-story building would have 8 units and be approximately 8,600 square feet in size, fully complying with the R6 zoning on this site. Next slide. The Brooklyn Community Board 5 held their public hearing on this last week. We are waiting to get there for them to submit their vote, but they did vote to approve this. And then the Brooklyn Borough President also recommended approval of this application. I'll now take any questions that you have.
Great, thank you. Only one for me. Can you just say a little bit more about Site 3's mayoral override?
Yeah, Jeff, are you able to pull up the presentation and we can go back to slide 6? Okay, so in the plan, you can see that Ashford Street is on the right and then Dumont Avenue is on the bottom. And so there is a 10-foot, because R5 zoning requires 10-foot front yards on both sides of the corner lot. There would have been a 10-foot yard required along Dumont Avenue. The HPD requested a mayoral override so that they could, have the maximum possible yard to the, sorry, I'm mixed up in my directions, but towards the top of the site, further back along Ashford Street. And because the sidewalk was also wide enough along Dumont Avenue that it didn't pose like a public realm issue.
Okay. Okay. Commissioner Burney.
Oh, thank you. Karina, I was just having trouble understanding on 2358 Pitkin, what's happening on the ground floor? Because
Jeff, can you show slide 5? So the ground floor is it's just storefront. It's mostly commercial space, and then there's a residential entry, but generally just storefront glazing across the entire ground floor. As
so
required.
those double lines we see on the plan, that indicates what?
We're looking at a roof plan right now, not the ground floor plan.
Oh, that's a roof plan. Oh,
yeah.
Okay.
There is a ground floor plan in your packets.
I don't see it. I'll have to go back and look. So then my other question is, in a case like this, when you have HPD owns the building, I assume, and then whoever occupies that retail space becomes a tenant. Is that how that works?
No, tenant? So part of this action is to dispose of this property, the city-owned property, to a developer. And the Manny, the Mutual Housing Association of New York, and Cypress Hills Local Development Corporation were selected in an RFP. I think it was back in like 2016 as a developer for these sites. And so they'll be here on Wednesday to talk about that, and can certainly ask them to talk more about the commercial space.
Okay. So the affordability regulations then would apply to the residential, but not to the commercial. Is that how that happens?
Correct.
Okay. Good. I guess we'll hear more on Wednesday. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you, Commissioner. Commissioner Levin.
Yes, thank you. Chair Grodnick, your question about zoning overrides sent my brain into the Wayback Machine. And before the change of administration, we had encountered a number of these requests, and the idea was that at an appropriate time, we would get a presentation to update our understanding about how mayoral overrides of zoning work. And I think that would still be a very helpful thing to have on the agenda, just as, as an informational matter at an appropriate time going forward. There's a certain amount of information that HPD has to provide to the mayor's office. They're available only under certain circumstances. We don't get involved in them, but I think it would be very helpful for us to, tune up our understanding of the circumstances under which they are provided and the kind of information that supports that conclusion.
I think that's a great suggestion, Commissioner. Thank you. Okay, let's see. I think that's it for this one. So thank you very much, Karina. We appreciate it. We will we'll see this one at the public hearing on Wednesday. And let's go to our next item, Ryan.
The 8th item on our agenda is a pre-hearing review of an acquisition for continued use of a senior center in Brooklyn Community District 4. Our presenter is David Weisglass. David.
Good afternoon, Commissioners. The New York City Department for the Aging and the co-applicant, the Department of Citywide Administrative Services, are seeking acquisition approval for continued use of a neighborhood senior center. To facilitate the proposed project, an acquisition action approval of the 17,600 square foot space within the 1175 Gates Avenue building is required for the continued use of this existing senior center. Next slide, please. The project is located in Community District 4 in the Bushwick neighborhood in Brooklyn. Next slide, please. The project area is located at 1175 Gates Avenue, 1.5 blocks north of Broadway, with Bushwick Avenue to the south, Evergreen Avenue to the north, and Gates Avenue to the southeast. The surrounding area is mapped with an R6 zoning district. Next slide, please. The Roundtable Senior Center serves approximately 200 seniors per day, with services operating Monday through Friday between 9 a.m. and 7 p.m. and consists of a variety of activities, including meal service, case assistance, education, recreation, health promotion, and nutritional education. Next slide, please. The community board held a hearing on the application on February 16th, 2022, and has unanimously submitted a recommendation to approve the application with the stipulation that a 20-year lease is secured. It's our understanding that DCAS and DIPTA have every intention of securing that 20-year lease. Next slide, please. The borough president held a hearing on the application on February 17th, 2022, and has submitted a recommendation to approve the application. Next slide, please. I did want to take this opportunity to briefly touch upon some of the design improvements to the exterior that the applicants and the property owners are intent on addressing, as some of these improvements were not part of the plan at certification. This image shows the facade of the building with the entrance to the senior center on the left, with a rendering of planters between the entrances. The exterior facade is to be cleaned consistently to remove all graffiti or unauthorized painting. And Department for the Aging is exploring the potential of adding street trees outside the building and improving signage at the building entry. As noted, these planters shown here are to be added in front of the building. The exterior door is to be painted to match the door of the adjacent daycare entrance on the right side of the building. And the roll down shutter in front of the door, in front of the front entrance, is to be removed. Finally, new windows are to be replaced, and this is likely to occur in 2023. This completes my presentation. I'd be happy to answer any questions that you might have.
Excellent. Thank you very much. I don't have questions on this one. Commissioner Cerullo does, though. Commissioner.
Just a quick question. First, I just want to acknowledge the improvements that are being made physically to the exterior of the space. But I have a question. In the description of the application is for a 20-year lease, and then the community board's recommendation was as if it was contingent on it getting a 20-year lease. Is there a question that will not happen, and that's why the community board stressed that? Or
sorry to cut you off.
No, please.
It's my understanding that when the application was submitted, the length of the lease itself was not necessarily specified.
Okay.
And so the community board wanted to ensure that it was for at least 20 years.
Okay, understood.
But we've since spoken to both DCAS and DIPTA, and they've confirmed that's their intention to secure a 20-year lease.
Okay, thank you, David. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Commissioner. Commissioner Marin.
Thank you, Chair. David, I have a question. I know we've talked about this at various presentations of daycare centers. I know that at one time we endeavored to have some sort of design party or some ideas of what a center could incorporate to make it a little bit more welcoming. I don't see any renderings here. Is the intention to provide renderings later, or we understand verbally what's been discussed and what's going to be upgraded, but we don't see a visual. Is there anything that could be provided?
Yes, I'll be sure to reach out to the applicant and see if they can provide something on Wednesday. At the end of the day, that they do have to kind of communicate with the property owner and try to get that, agreement together. But I'll be sure to try to secure that by Wednesday if possible.
Well, sure. But I mean, I think all applicants know that by now that that's something that we've been looking forward. So, to come at this point and not have that, I think, we should be a little bit more diligent in reminding applicants that we're expecting to see that.
Understood. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner. Commissioner Edie.
Hi. Just following up on that, I did see the scope of work in our package for the building that did include some work for mechanical or at least electrical equipment and so forth. I was wondering, otherwise, there was nothing about the air conditioning and stuff like that. I'm assuming everything else that's not included here, we assume are in good working order, and the tenant and the city are satisfied that it will be sufficient to last for the next 20 years, or that the lease at least incorporates language that the landlord would replace and repair as necessary.
I would like to let the applicant speak to the specific lease, but it's certainly my understanding that would be part of the lease and has been previously, I believe, as well, and would be continued. But I'd let the applicant speak to that on Wednesday as to the specifics.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you, Commissioner. Okay, That's it on this one. So thank you very much. We will see this at the public hearing on Wednesday. Ryan, what's next on our list here? A non-ULURP?
Yeah, we have a non-ULURP sort of break between pre-hearing items. So the 9th item on our agenda is a non-ULURP review of a general project plan in Brooklyn Community District 9, and Sanmati Nayak will present.
Good afternoon, Commissioners. The New York State Urban Development Corporation's ESD is adopting this general project plan, the GPP, for the proposed Utica Crescent mixed-use project. This is a land use improvement and residential project that ESD, in collaboration with New York State Homes and Community Renewal, the HCR, is sponsoring pursuant to New York State's UDC Act. Next, please. ESD is requesting a letter of approval for the zoning override for its GPP and design guidelines. ESD needs a override so they don't have to build pursuant to New York City zoning resolution and meet the requirements of the underlying zoning district. Regarding the CPC purview, the CPC is being asked to support the zoning override. The CPC can request changes and make suggestions. However, ESD does not have an obligation to accept the recommendations. The project is located in Community District 9 in Brooklyn. Next, please. The proposed project is part of the State of New York's Vital Brooklyn Initiative, which is a comprehensive community development program, addresses chronic social, economic, and health disparities in central Brooklyn, one of the most underserved areas in the state. Next, please. This team has been selected as the conditionally designated developer back in 2020. Next, please. The project site shown in red is located just north of the East Flatbush neighborhood along Utica Avenue. There are 2 other future Vital Brooklyn development sites within CD9. One is the Kingsbrook Jewish Medical Center located just west of the project site, and the other is within the Kingsborough Psychiatric Center located between Winthrop Street and Clarkson Avenue towards the west. Next, please. The project site is bounded by 60-foot wide East 49th Street to the west, the 60-foot wide Rutland Road to the north, and the 100-foot wide Utica Avenue to the east. It is split between the yellow shaded R6 district and the red shaded C82 district. R6 districts allows residential and community facility uses. R6 quality housing district allows a maximum residential FAR of 2.2 along narrow street and a maximum height of 55 feet, both of which are lower than what is being proposed in the GPP. The C82 district allows a wide variety of commercial uses up to a maximum of 2 FAR. However, it does not permit residential uses, which is proposed in the GPP. Next, please. The surrounding area includes a mix of residential, commercial, and transportation and community facility uses. The residential uses are predominantly 2-story row houses and 3 to 6-story multifamily buildings. The commercial zone along Utica Avenue contains 1 to 3-storied buildings, including auto-oriented uses, a hotel, and local retail uses. The community facility use includes a medical institution, a house of worship, and a daycare. The lot adjacent to the project site, just at the corner of Utica and Rutland, is not owned by the applicant. It contains a gas station. The area is located within the transit zone and served by a couple of bus lines, including an SBS route along Utica Avenue, and the nearest subway stop is 3/4 mile to the north along Empire Boulevard. Next, please. The project site is comprised of an irregular shaped lot, including approximately 62,500 square feet, and is currently used as a surface parking lot for the adjacent Kingsbrook Jewish Medical Center, who also owns the site. Next, please. The proposal includes residential, commercial, and community facility uses. It is envisioned to be a health-focused development consisting of a single building with a one-story base and towers fronting the streets ranging from 7, 9, and 12 stories in height. Next, please. This is an overview of the benefits of the proposed project, which include affordable housing and supportive housing and wellness opportunities to the residents in this area. Next, please. The total area of the proposed development is approximately 391,000 gross square feet. The table provides further breakdown of uses, which includes approximately 321,000 of residential and 22,500 of commercial retail use. Next, please. This is 100% affordable housing development, includes 322 units containing a mix of unit types, and it would serve seniors, formerly homeless persons, and people from low-income families and individuals. Next, please. The proposed uses on the ground floor includes a dialysis center, grocery store, and a charitable organization, which provides social services and programs to those in need. The grocery store has frontages along both Utica and East 49th Street. And the access to the residential towers is also from both Utica and East 49th Street. The parking includes surface parking lot and at the cellar level. The surface parking lot, which is fronting on Utica, contains 284 spaces, which would be reserved for the use of Kingsbrook employees. Next, please. Next, please. This plan shows the second floor showing the landscaped courtyard and the indoor recreational spaces, which are reserved for the residents of the development. Next, please. The open space includes the landscape terrace on multiple levels, and there would be dedicated recreational and exercise facilities, including a mix of programmed and flexible spaces. Next, please. So the zoning overrides and the design guidelines. The existing zoning R6 and C82 does not allow for the uses, the height, and the bulk which is proposed in the GPP. In order to implement the proposed project, ESD would need to override the New York City zoning resolution in accordance with the UDC Act and establish design guidelines which would govern the proposed development and act in lieu of zoning and other local requirements. Next, please. Pursuant to SECRA, the New York State lead agency has determined that the proposed project is an unlisted action and has prepared an environmental assessment statement. As part of the coordinated SECRA review process, both HCR and ESD have made a determination of non-significance. Next, please. These show the design guidelines, the building envelope that is being approved. Along Utica Avenue, there's a maximum height of 23, which is the base, and rises up to 95 feet. And along East 49th Street, the max base height is 23 feet and rises to 95 and 125 feet. In addition, vertical articulation would be also required along the long facade frontages. Next, please. The design guidelines also include requirements for various components of the proposal, like the lots, signage, street yards, and the open space. DCP worked with ESD and the development team, which led to establishing certain design guidelines, which include a minimum ground floor transparency of 50%, a requirement of a 7-foot deep landscape buffer along Utica Avenue surface parking lot, and parking lot landscaping to enhance Utica Avenue's pedestrian experience, and to limit curb cut width along Utica Avenue. Next, please. So coming towards the end of the presentation, we want to outline two of the outstanding concerns we have. The first is regarding the overall bulk distribution. As currently proposed, the development is 7, 9, and 12 stories along East 49th Street, and 7 stories along Utica Avenue. Considering the context of Utica, which is a 100-foot wide street, an SBS route, and an emerging corridor, and in contrast, the East 49th a 60-foot wide side street with 2 to 6 story buildings, DCP had suggested redistribution of bulk, so moving more bulk towards Utica Avenue to make the proposal more compatible with the context. ESD has responded, and I'll read out their response. On bulk, we agree, but unfortunately, a confluence of out-parcel conditions, fair housing concerns related to distribution of units, and limitations on how we can use public subsidies for multifamily construction have forced us to concentrate more bulk along East 49th and across from the Kingsbrook estate projects. As the design guidelines show, we have stepped the height down towards southwest corner of the site in response to the existing context. Next, please. So the second concern we have relates to the surface parking. We see this as a missed opportunity to redevelop a parking lot along Utica Avenue and strengthen the street wall, and also to lower the bulk along East 49th Street. ESD response is that they understand but cannot make substantial changes to the massing because of the lot configuration and the requirement to provide parking for the Jewish Medical Center, which is part of their agreement. Next, please. So in summary, CPC is being asked for an approval letter in support of the zoning override. We approve of the Utica project proposal and have some outstanding concerns, as just mentioned earlier. And as a practice, we share our concerns with CPC, even if the state is not able to address all of them. So in the approval letter, CPC can convey the concerns or recommendations which they believe would be appropriate for the proposal. This concludes our presentation, and happy to take any questions.
Thank you very much. Can you just go back to the recommendation that they move more bulk toward Utica Avenue and what the response was?
Sure. So here there are a combination of factors. One is that the out parcel condition, which is the gas station, which limits the amount of design flexibility which they have. I'm not too sure about the fair housing concerns, so I can't really speak to that. But the third factor is the requirement to provide the surface parking lot for the Jewish Medical Center, which is part of the agreement. So all of that together is limiting how they can distribute the bulk. And I can, Sagi, if you have any more thoughts on that, please jump in.
Yeah, if you can go on a site plan, maybe that's maybe better explained. I think some of the considerations that we've heard from the ESD is efficiency. The lot or parcel along Utica is a smaller lot. And so the ability to, the next slide, I think slide 14 is good as well. The ability to actually accommodate the amount of units that support the financial feasibility of the building is of a lesser degree. And so the concentration for efficiency is concentrated along East 49th Street because it's the largest portion of their lot. And in addition, there was a requirement per the conversations that they had with the hospital team about the surface parking. It needs to be not an attended parking for financial feasibility. And so a surface parking lot was considered for this project. And so the location of it along Utica was determined as being most efficient for the project.
Got it. Thank you. Commissioner Marin. Let's give him a sec.
Okay, thank you. Sorry about that. Wet fingers. My question revolves around the statement of needing the location for fair housing, and I'm really not understanding that. So if somebody could really elaborate on that further later, that would be really appreciated, because I mean, fair housing laws just really state that everyone should be given an equal opportunity to be able to apply to a building, regardless of race, color, creed, sexual orientation, those kind of things. So I'm just really stuck on that statement. I would like to understand it.
We can certainly ask for clarification from ESD. Yes.
Thank you. Yes, I would appreciate that.
Sure.
Great. Thank you, Commissioner. Great. Commissioner Levin.
So Sanmati, is the idea that we would send a comment letter enumerating the three things that you highlighted, that is the shifting the bulk and the parking lot, and I forget what the third one was, that it all made sense to me.
That's right.
Even though ESD has said they're not taking you up on those good suggestions.
Yeah, that's right. Depending upon the feedback which we get from the commission today, we were planning to do a draft letter, and that will be shared with you in time for the April 11th review session.
Okay, well, your concerns are my concerns, so I would encourage us to continue to lay those out, even if we know that they're going to fall on deaf ears.
I agree.
Yep, great. Me too, by the way, and we appreciate your laying that out for us, and we will see you back with a letter, and we'll talk about this a little further. So thank you both. Sanmati, we appreciate your presentation. And we're going to move on next. Well, we're on to a new borough. So Ryan?
Yes, we're back on pre-hearings. We're back in Queens. So the 10th item on our agenda is a pre-hearing review, zoning map and zoning text amendments, UDAP designation and disposition of city-owned property, and an amendment to an urban renewal plan in Queens Community District 3. Hala Saleh will be our presenter and tell us what happened on this. Hala?
Great, thank you. Good afternoon, commissioners. I'll be presenting on the Resilient Edgemere Community Plan. Next slide. This is an HPD sponsored project within the Edgemere Urban Renewal Area in Queens Community District 14. The requested actions were certified on December 13th of 2021 for a zoning map amendment, text amendment, urban renewal plan amendment, UDAP, and disposition of city-owned property. The next slide. The Edgemere Plan and Urban Renewal Area is located on the eastern portion of the Rockaway Peninsula and bounded by Beach 35th Street to the east, Beach 50th and 51st Street to the west, Jamaica Bay to the north, and Rockaway Freeway to the south. The Edgemere neighborhood is a low-lying waterfront community, and between the 1960s and 1990s, the city acquired over 150 lots. The Edgemere Urban Renewal Area was designated in 1997 and amended in 2008. However, following the 2008 financial crisis and Hurricane Sandy in 2012, much of the city-owned property remains vacant and unimproved. Next slide. The Edgemere Urban Renewal Area is outlined in orange and is just north of the Auburn Urban Renewal Area. Other notable developments are the Beach Green Dunes developments and Edgemere Commons, which all provide 100% affordable housing. Next slide. The Resilient Edgemere Community Planning Initiative began in 2015 to align with the city's Sandy recovery and assess the area's vacant land for long-term comprehensive planning. HPD led an 18-month community-based and interagency planning initiative, engaging over 400 residents. The community plan was released in 2017, which included a conceptual planning framework and land use plan. This plan proposed a long-term vision for the community to pull back development from the vulnerable water's edge and concentrate new development towards transit resources along Rockaway Beach Boulevard. So the land use framework aimed to provide a managed growth strategy to address the existing flood risk, while also facilitating the development of vacant land to create affordable housing, commercial, and community facility spaces. Next slide. The Edgemere neighborhood faces significant flood risk and coastal hazards. The area is located within the high-risk floodplain with a base flood elevation ranging from 9 to 11 feet. A portion of the neighborhood is also located within the coastal A subzone, where wave action during a coastal storm event could result in additional damage to property. High tide projections for the 2050s show the area will experience twice daily flooding in the next 30 years. The lightest shade of pink represents the most conservative projections we have for sea level rise for the 2050s, which is about 30 inches. However, as shown on the map, the severity of the flooding varies throughout the neighborhood, with the northern peninsula experiencing the most vulnerability, and then there being less flooding further inland. This condition also only shows the projections of the area absent any intervention or investment, and the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers have planned projects in the area which would reduce flood risk during storm events and tidal inundation over the next 50 years. Next slide. The project area has a total area of approximately 166 acres and comprises of predominantly vacant and unimproved city-owned land. The Resilient Edgemere project is divided into 4 sub-areas. The hazard mitigation area, shown in red, is directly along the Jamaica Bay waterfront and is the lowest lying area of the project, making it the most vulnerable to flooding and coastal hazards. The plan would limit all city-owned property to open space and any new residential development to single-family detached buildings. The limited development area is in yellow, and it's inland from the hazard mitigation area and would limit any new development to 1 or 2 family detached homes. However, for lots less than 25 feet, development would be limited to 1 family detached buildings. The neighborhood infill area in blue is generally at the center of the project area and less exposed to coastal hazards. This portion of the project area would remain at current densities and land uses to develop city-owned land in line with the existing context. Lastly, the commercial corridor in green is the furthest inland along Rockaway Beach Boulevard and Beach 50th Streets, nearest to the elevated A subway line. This area is proposed to facilitate the development of vacant city-owned land for affordable housing, commercial, and community facility space in mid-rise mixed-use buildings. Next slide. The future development potential by the proposed actions would result in approximately a total of 1,222 new residential units and approximately 115,000 square feet of non-residential uses. However, within the commercial corridor, there are 5 sites that are city-owned and would enter into the RFP process following ULURP to develop multifamily mixed-use buildings. While these buildings have not been designed, the DEIS identified the development potential for these city-sponsored multifamily buildings to result in a total of 530 units, approximately 54,665 square feet of commercial space, and 266 parking spaces. Next slide. In order to facilitate the proposed treatments for each sub-area, a set of land uses are proposed, including several zoning map amendments, a zoning text amendment to establish an MIH area and special coastal risk district, several amendments to the urban renewal plan, UDOP designation, and disposition of real city-owned property. Next slide. There are a series of zoning map amendments throughout the project area, which would typically restrict the building typology to 1 to 2 family homes and prohibit multifamily development along the northern portions of the neighborhood. An R6A with a C24 commercial overlay is proposed for multifamily mixed-use buildings along the southern portion of the project area. Additionally, a special coastal risk district would be mapped on the northern portion to further restrict development beyond the underlying zoning districts. Next slide. A zoning text amendment would establish the 5th special coastal risk district within the city to modify the land use regulations within the proposed boundary. For R3A and 3A zoning districts within the Special Coastal Risk District, residential development would be limited to single-family detached buildings. For the R41 zoning districts, residential development on lots greater than 25 feet would be limited to 1 and 2 family detached buildings, while lots that are less than 25 feet in width would be limited to single family detached buildings. The Special Coastal Risk District would also prohibit community facilities with overnight sleeping accommodations. Next slide. The zoning text amendment to establish 2 MIH areas are proposed. One area, generally bounded by Beach 50th Street and Beach 49th Street, between Rockaway Beach Boulevard and Beach Channel Drive. And the other area is bounded by Beach 43rd Street and Beach 38th Street, between Rockaway Beach Boulevard and Rockaway Freeway. Both areas are proposed to be mapped with options 1 and 2. Next slide. There are a number of amendments associated with the urban renewal plan and the urban renewal area. All sites within the urban renewal area would be acquired, as well as new acquisition for the expanded geography. The urban renewal area boundary would change by the addition of 13 lots and the removal of 9 lots. The duration of the urban renewal plan would also be extended for a period of 40 years from the date of this second amendment. Next slide. Land use designations throughout the urban renewal plan would also be amended. 10 sites would be changed to open space, and 1 site would be added to open space. 4 sites would be changed to commercial and residential, and 2 sites would be changed to residential. Additionally, the definition of open space would be amended to include agricultural uses when permitted by zoning. And lastly, 2 amendments to the supplementary controls of redevelopment, which includes the change of density to permit up to 1,500 units instead of 800 units, and the removal of height restrictions for the perimeter walls to exceed 25 feet. Next slide. UDAA and UDAP designation is proposed for 5 sites over 42 lots and 2 demapped roadways. Land uses would consist of residential, community space, and community facility space. And lastly, a disposition of all properties within the urban renewal area is proposed to be disposed to a sponsor determined by HPD. Next slide. The DEIS identified adverse impacts in respect to community facilities for early childhood, open space for active recreation, transportation for traffic, transit, and safety, construction noise and air quality for mobile source, but to be mitigated by the traffic mitigation, and no other adverse impacts were identified. Next slide. Queens Community Board 14 held a public hearing on February 8th and voted to disapprove the application due to concerns related to the increased density for the proposed R6A zoning district within the commercial corridor. The Queensborough president held a public hearing on February 28th and on March 17th recommended approval with conditions. The conditions included a commitment for local hiring, exploring home ownership opportunities and a community benefit agreement for the mixed-use corridor, and implementing the CLT and continuing to incorporate that model throughout the peninsula where feasible. Next slide. The conditions also included that the applicant should continue to work with city and state agencies to provide youth and community services, as well as co-working spaces and economic development opportunities. For DEP to provide a study to mitigate long-term flooding issues. For the Department of Parks and Recreation to fast-track improvements at Bayswater Park, walking trails along the bay, Rockaway Community Park, and increased lifeguards. And for DOT to identify transportation infrastructure improvements. Next slide. as well as widening Edgemere Avenue. Lastly, for health and hospitals to develop a new healthcare or hospital facility. The other conditions included that all construction should use energy efficient techniques and sustainable materials, that a school should be built on the reserve site from Auburn by the Sea, for Parks and DSNY to release an RFEI for the former Edgemere landfill for green infrastructure, such as a solar farm. And this now concludes my presentation, and I can take any questions.
Excellent. Thank you, Hala. That was great. A really thoughtful plan here. So congratulations. I only have a couple of questions for you. One of them, I wanted to see if you could say a little bit more about the green spaces that were on the map and how they may be linked together in a meaningful way once they are all there, and how that might come to be.
Sure. So all of the green spaces that were shown in the map earlier, especially those that are within the hazard mitigation area, will be designated open space in perpetuity. And they are mostly all city-owned land. And those parcels would also be within a community land trust that would provide, I believe there's 55 lots that are open space that would be going into this community land trust. And that third party, once they have been selected by HPD, they're going through that process currently, would look into resources for the community that could be using those vacant sites. So I can let HPD also further discuss that, but the intention is those would be given over to the CLT and provide some resource to the community.
That's great. I think that's a great opportunity for the neighborhood. If there's a way to somehow connect them so that people see and feel them as a unified whole, as opposed to a lot of individual one-off lots. So I think that's really important. This is just a point of clarification. I think that I know the answer. The 5 city sites, they're all in the area you described as the commercial corridor, right? That is, okay. And then the last question is, this becomes if approved, it would become the 5th coastal risk district in the city. Maybe this is a question for the waterfront guys presented earlier, but can you help me? Which of the pieces of all the things that you said makes this a coastal risk district? Is it the fact that you have a hazard mitigation area? Is it a certain number of properties here included in this plan that make it that thing, or is it just something that we recognize as, if we're looking at it for the purpose of doing some downzoning and limiting city development, that is it? I don't know if there's a special sauce that makes it the thing.
Sure. Yeah. So the Special Coastal Risk District was a tool that was created in 2017, and it was made to address coastal areas that are currently at exceptional risk for flooding and could face even greater risk in the future. So it's a tool that helps us further limit new development in these really highly vulnerable areas. So zoning on its own for the rezoning that we have in both the hazard mitigation area and the limited development area, which are making up this Special Coastal Risk District, would allow up to 2 family homes or something like that. And in the hazard mitigation area, we really want to just limit it to single family detached homes. So the Special Coastal Risk District allows us to further limit development beyond the zoning that's placed in that area.
Okay, got it. It's the special set of rules which allow for further limitation beyond what the zoning otherwise allows. And that's exactly what you get. That's what you get by having this be designated as the special risk district. Okay, exactly. Great. Excellent. Thank you. Mr. Vice Chairman.
Thank you. Thank you, Chair. And thank you, Hala. It was an excellent presentation. I just have 2 questions. First, if you go back to slide 14, which I think is the aerial, one of the aerial shots that you have in, where you have the 5 sites. No, it's an actual aerial with the sites imposed on it.
I believe it's slide 16.
I think it's
Slide
slide 8.
14. 14.
I think it's slide 8 on my deck.
Well, they're different ones that have the same thing, where it has the massing superimposed on the aerial shots. Yeah, like that. I just want to make sure what I'm looking at. That element between the highway and the sites that looks elevated, is that a railroad? What is that?
Yes, that's the elevated A line. So that's the subway.
Okay. Don't get out that far. So I didn't know what it was.
Sure.
Secondly, if you could just elaborate, if you could, on the community board's rationale for its disapproval. And you mentioned something about, I think it was the R6 designations. Could you just elaborate on that?
Absolutely. Yeah, their disapproval was mostly centered around that commercial corridor, the portion of the plan that is proposing multifamily mixed-use buildings, the R6A with the C24 overlay. There's a lot of hesitation to the increased density here, as well as lack of infrastructure. There were also concerns related to home ownership. These are going to be mostly rental properties in these multifamily buildings. And they wanted some more home ownership opportunities there as well. So it really came down to density, infrastructure, and home ownership were the main points of discussion.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Vice Chairman. Commissioner Rampersad.
Thank you, Hala, for that presentation. Very good. Quick question. I guess when the applicant team comes on Wednesday, if they can just discuss or speak to the recommendations made by the Queensborough president. One in particular is the one with regards to DOT widening Edgemere from Beach 32nd to Beach 56th Street. Has there been any further conversation with DOT, or do you know where they're at with regards to that?
Well, we do know that DOT has provided a letter that I believe HPD will be sharing with the commission to speak to that. And the widening of Edgemere Avenue was through the Auburn East project. Right. So I know there was a commitment to study that widening, but we'll let them, update us in that letter to the commission.
Okay, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you, Commissioner Levin.
Yes, thank you. Hala, the community land trust being proposed for development of the lower density sites and the open space that we just discussed. Will HPD be able to tell us a little bit more about their efforts to identify a partner for that and how that might come to fruition? I'm very excited that this model is being proposed and keen to learn more about how it becomes real.
Absolutely, yes. There will be someone on the project team on Wednesday to specifically speak to the CLT, okay. But they are doing a request for expressions of interests for other organizations, and they're hoping to partner with a local organization here, as well as entering into a regulatory agreement. But okay. Yes, there will definitely be someone here to speak to
great.
the CLT.
I'm glad I'll get some airtime on Wednesday. Thank you.
Great. Commissioner Marin.
Thank you, Chair. So, Hala, most of the questions that I was going to ask were asked and answered. I had specifically a question about home ownership. I have a subsequent question about AMIs, but I know the project is not so developed far into the project to determine AMIs yet. And then my last question would be, which I think you answered partially, would be that there would, if I understand correctly, there would be an RFP for the CLT to see who would have interest in being the CLT for the project. Is that correct?
There would be an RFEI, which is a request for expressions of interest for the CLT, and then an RFP for the 5 multifamily sites that are along
And
that
with
commercial corridor.
with the RFP for the 5 multifamily sites, would those be let as one or individual sites? Do you know? At this
Individual,
time?
it'd be 5 separate sites, I believe.
So each chosen developer would then would the agreement with the CLT or with the decision of who to choose the CLT would be that of the developers, or that would be that of the city in conjunction with the developers?
I believe that would be, I'll let HPD handle that on Wednesday, but I believe HPD would be the one issuing out the RFP for those development sites, because the CLT is only for the sites that are within the hazard mitigation area, the limited development area, and the infill, and not in the commercial corridor. So the CLT would not be part of the 5 RFP sites.
Would not be part of the 5 else.
No, the CLT is really just going to manage 119 lots that are in the other 4 sub areas. So basically,
Understood.
yeah. And then the
And why would HPD not layer the CLT here, where I would think would be most beneficial to preserve the affordability in perpetuity?
I believe it's because
that's the function of the CLT, to try and secure affordability in perpetuity, of course, along with regulatory agreements, but being on the CLT preserves the tax basis for the property. It preserves affordability in longevity.
Mm-hmm.
So why not the 5 properties that are rental or that are built, that these units, homeownership units, rental or homeownership, are being built?
Right. I will definitely have HPD speak to that on Wednesday, but I think it was due to the home ownership component of it, but I will absolutely have them speak to that on Wednesday.
Understood. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you, Commissioner. Okay, that's all we got, Hala. Thank you so much. We appreciate it, and we will look forward to the public hearing on this item on Wednesday. And with that, we're going to move on to a couple of city council modifications here.
That's right. So the 11th item on our agenda is a city council modification scope determination for 9881 Queens Boulevard rezoning. The council proposes to strike the mandatory inclusionary housing option 2, leaving option 1. Staff believes that this modification is within scope.
Great, thank you. Are there any questions about that? I know this is not the first of this type. So I am going to ask for assent to send a letter to the city council that the proposed modification here is within scope. So all those in favor, please say aye.
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 Opposed, nay. The ayes have it.
I'm sorry. I'm sorry. I have a quick question. So the switch from the options makes it more MIH available or less?
So the option 1, which is the option that remains, is 20% of the floor area, the residential floor area, has to be affordable to at a AMI for 60% of the area median income. So it's the more affordable. Yeah,
it's 25%, isn't it, Ryan?
I believe that it is. Option 1 is 25%. Thank you, Vice Chair. Yes, 25%.
I'll just my question basically is the option that remains more affordable housing or less?
It is less in terms of the floor area, but the affordability levels are lower.
Are lower.
Yes. So it's
so
60%.
less actual apartments. I'm sorry.
Yeah. It usually results in 25% of the apartments, typically.
Yeah. Fewer apartments, deeper affordability.
That's right.
Okay. Any other questions? This is a scope determination here for whether the city council knocking out one of the 2 options for this rezoning is in scope. I did not hear anybody opposed, unless I'll just give another chance since we were mid-vote. Okay. All right. Nobody opposed. We'll send that letter to the city council. I suspect we're about to hear the same thing on Sutphin Boulevard.
It's a slightly different. So the
Go ahead.
12th item on the agenda is City Council mod scope determination for 9704 Sutphin Boulevard rezoning. And here the council proposes to strike the mandatory inclusionary housing option 2 and replace it with the deep affordability option. And for this, I will just let the commission know that the deep affordability option requires 20%, that's why it was in my head, of the residential floor area of the building, roughly 20% of the units, be affordable to an average of 40% of the area median income. So it's yet deeper affordability and a somewhat smaller percentage of the floor area. And again, staff believes that this modification is within scope.
Okay, before we vote, are there questions on this? Okay, seeing none, I'd like to send a letter to the city council that the proposed modification is within scope here. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
All opposed, nay. All right, the ayes have it. We will proceed. Thanks, Ryan.
Thank you. For future votes on Wednesday, March 30th, 2022, there are scheduled for vote the PS 005 Richmond Huguenot expansion. This is an expansion of a school. They needed some actions pursuant to Staten Island Special District. Also 350 Edge Grove Avenue, 63 Holcomb Avenue and 64 Canton Avenue, and 48 Polion Avenue. One of the Commissioner Cerullo, how did I do?
Polion, yes, very good, Ryan.
Avenue. All right. So if there's any questions on those, I'm not seeing any hands raised. And then for post-hearing follow-up, I will read a few of them. I don't believe we have anything scheduled for the first 4 of these, but if there's further questions, we can address that. 3501 Vernon Boulevard rezoning, Broadway Triangle Bartlett Crossing, 2300 Cropsey Avenue, and 840 Lorimer Street rezoning. Okay. And then for the 145 Museum of Civil Rights, Eric Botsford is here with Jose Trucios and Annie White to discuss. There was both materials in your package and then also an email that went out today with some information. So Eric.
Hi, Brian.
Actually, Annie's going to kick us off.
Oh, okay,
Yes.
Annie,
Thanks.
go ahead.
Yeah. Sorry for the last minute change, but good afternoon, commissioners. Before Jose gets into the formal post-hearing presentation, wanted to address just some questions regarding the proposed development size and use that were raised by Chair Gorodnick, Commissioner Goodridge, and others at our public hearing. So in our department's evaluation of any project that comes through the pre-certification process, the department does not evaluate proposals based on specific proposed tenants. So according to the applicant, the Museum of Civil Rights remains a component of the proposed development. The department has evaluated the proposed zoning district and permitted uses independent of specifically the museum component. This special permit, which is part of the application, would limit the space currently proposed for the museum to community facility uses. An alternative community facility tenant does not alter the development's assumptions that were both analyzed in our pre-certification process or in the DEIS, and it does not alter our evaluation of the appropriateness of the proposed zoning district. The department believes the density is appropriate given the currently underutilized site's location at the intersection of 2 wide streets, adjacency to a park in the Harlem River waterfront, and good transit accessibility, including the 3 train on that same block. The proposed zoning map amendment will allow a significant number of housing units, including approximately 250 affordable units through MIH, which would not currently be permitted in the C8 district, as well as additional commercial and community facility uses. So in the package, you received some of the applicants' responses to many of the other questions raised at the public hearing. In addition, there's a response to the appropriateness from the applicant to the density and height at this location. And now I'll hand it over to Jose to go over the remaining follow-up items. Thank you.
Hi, thank you, Ani. Can you guys hear me? Great. Good afternoon, commissioners. This will be the first post-hearing follow-up presentation for the 145 Lennox in an effort to provide additional information to the commission and the public. Next slide, please. A quick recap. This is a private application by 145 Lennox LLC for a zoning map amendment, a zoning text amendment, 4 special permits, and 3 city planning commission certifications to facilitate the development of a mixed-use development in Community District 10 Manhattan. The application was certified November 15 of last year and was duly referred out to the Community Board 10 and Board of President. The CPC held a hearing on March 2nd to receive comments concerning the application and the draft environmental impact statement. Next slide, please. While the applicant team provided responses to the commission during the public hearing, given the scope of this project, some of the questions needed further clarification. Today, we will provide a quick overview of the additional information provided while the complete list of the supporting materials was shared with the commission. With that, the topics for today are the 145 Community Retail Empowerment Initiative, which contain details on the retail outreach plan and retail tenancy program. And perhaps the hot topic during the hearing, because it's relatively new in section in New York's landscape, the 145 Green Energy Improvement District, or GRID. The materials shared contain technical information about the GRID plan with a list of other geothermal districts completed by members of the applicant team and up-to-date research completed by the applicant team. The 145 Empowered Initiative contains details on the programming for the proposed Green Opportunity Workshops, internships, and mentorship program. And last, the MTA accessibility constraint at the 145th Street, number 3 subway station. Next slide, please. We will also have an opportunity to provide additional information during the next review session slated for April 11th, where we're gonna focus on the FIA's open mitigation proposal, letters of support from key stakeholders, and any follow-up questions that are raised today. Next slide, please. The 145 Community Retail Empowered Initiative will prioritize local retail. The initiative is a community-based retail and business incentive program to provide below market rent and preferential space for Harlem businesses. The applicant will reserve at least 20% of the total retail square footage to this initiative, which is equivalent to 6,800 square footage approximately. Of these, 50% must qualify as NWBEs. Local retail tenants will receive 10% discount to market rents based on a third-party broker opinion of value. And the applicant is working with 16 tenants so that they can either stay at the new 145 development or find other locations in Harlem. Excluding the community facility use, the applicant has committed to have no single retail tenant occupying over 20,000 square footage of ground floor space. In order to ensure the success of this initiative, the applicant will work with local commerce organizations like the Greater Harlem Chamber of Commerce and other uptown leaders to outreach to local business owners and entrepreneurs. Next slide, please. District energy systems are a set of buildings that are a common heating, cooling, and sometimes electrical systems. Synergies between the systems result in much less total energy use than if the buildings were serviced individually. The Green Energy Improvement District is designed around a clean energy technology. A green energy district uses natural energy flows, recovers and repurposes energy, and saves building owners and occupants costs associated with energy-related services. According to the applicant, the proposed development is designed to reduce carbon emissions, promote long-term economic equity in the new green economy, create higher-paying jobs, provide vocational and educational training as part of the reimagined and integrated plan to build back better. Harlan Grid will utilize a high-performance system that includes geothermal technology, solar energy, sewage energy recovery, high-efficient heat pumps, and ice storage. In Harlan, the applicant will need to combine ground source and river source to provide sufficient energy to heat and cool the entire Harlan Grid Energy District. To do this, they will need cooperation from the city to secure the rights of way and other river access necessary to develop a genuine district energy plan. Next slide, please. The Harlan Grid will include the project site and NYCHA campus to the south, with the applicant committed to the operation and maintenance of the district. If additional sites were to be incorporated to the grid, which was one of the requirements from the board president and the community board, this will require additional coordination, permissions, network development, and energy resource development. As a larger district system will require more area like public streets, sidewalks, and other public spaces. In response to the applicant's availability and experience with this relatively new approach to clean energy sourcing, the applicant provided other geothermal districts completed by their engineering and construction team, highlighting the Cornell Tech campus in Roosevelt Island, which could be the most relevant and geothermal district constructed in New York City. In 2019, the applicant completed an initial evaluation of the environmental permits necessary to construct and operate a cooling water intake structure in the East River, along with the onshore geothermal well, and has already established ongoing communication with the New York State Energy Research and Development Agency, New York Department of Environmental Protection, Empire State Development, New York Power Authority, the Green Bank, and also the previous and current governor's office. Next slide. The Youth Empowerment Initiative will be open to current residents who live within Community Board 10 and between the ages of 17 and 25. It will include a series of workshops, internships, and mentorship components. The Green Opportunity Workshops will focus on green energy education for local residents and will be sponsored by the New York State Energy Research and Development Agency, which has agreed to grant $5,000 for the administration of this program, $5,000. The internship and mentorship program will include up to 20 paid internships that will pay each intern $15 to $20 per hour for a total of 250 hours per calendar year. Academic credit for the time is being worked out through now, and the applicant is still working on the kinks of the proposal. Each student will be assigned a work site mentor to foster development of these skills and monitor progress with milestone evaluations. Partners include the development team and other associated firms in the engineering, construction, green technology, architecture, government relationships, legal, and urban planning fields. This program is fully funded by the developer and is expected to cost approximately $3,000 per student. On December 3rd, the MTA issued a negative easement determination for the site. While the determination didn't go in detail about the reasoning behind it, the applicant conducted a supplemental feasibility study for the location of an elevator within the new building to provide access to the subway. These feasibility studies focus on the topographical and ground penetrating surveys, identifying substantial complications unique to the site in the form of proximity to a DOT bridge, water table levels, and structures in the sidewalk that will make creating a vertical transportation system, such as an elevator connecting to the station, very difficult or pretty much infeasible. It's important to highlight that despite the inability to provide an additional access point to the station, the surrounding areas very well served by mass transit and alternative modes of transportation, including bike and car sharing stations located very close in proximity to the site. Next slide. With that, I can answer any questions the commission might have.
Thank you very much for the follow-up, Jose. I appreciate it. I want to go back to the question of use of that space in the Museum of Civil Rights. I understand that we have a communication from the project team or developer addressed to the members of the commission, which was shared just before the hearing, but I think you should read it out loud here in case anybody hasn't missed it.
Yeah, I don't have the message in front of me right now, but
I can do it, Jose. Yeah, I've got it. Thanks. So yes, you should have received the communication in an email earlier today, commissioners. But as Chair Gorodnick said, I'm happy to read it out loud. And this is from Land Use Council for the applicant, and also from Bruce Teilbaum, one of the members of the applicant team. And he says, Chair Gorodnick and members of the City Planning Commission, I am writing to you as a member of the 145 Museum of Civil Rights applicant team and the board of directors of the Civil Rights Foundation, the sponsor of the museum, in order to clarify the status of discussions between the applicant and the foundation museum. The foundation board met yesterday to discuss a number of items, including stories in the trade press claiming that the Reverend Sharpton and Don Peebles had made a deal to relocate the museum from 145 to a project that Peebles has been promoting, but for which he does not even have site control. At that meeting, I learned that both Reverend Sharpton and members of the board have categorically denied that there is any deal between the foundation or the museum on the one hand, and Peebles or his affiliates on the other. This is consistent with our understanding of the museum's position. We are continuing to negotiate in good faith for a lease of space in 145 to the museum, and we are hopeful that we will soon have completed these negotiations and reached agreement on lease terms. I will keep you up to date on our progress, Bruce.
Great. Thank you for sharing that, Eric. And obviously, as Annie described at the top, we will evaluate this in the context of the zoning that is sought and the opportunities that could be. And this is a note for us on this project and for all projects, which is we set the boundaries. We don't define all of the things. So we have to be comfortable with the boundaries here as to what we would allow. Okay, this is great. And Jose, thank you. Commissioner Burney has a question.
Yeah, and thank you guys. Thank you, Annie and Jose. I just still have a bit of a credibility problem with this project. And I'm yet to be convinced that they're actually going to make this grid plan work. And incorporating, public housing in the plan, it just seems technically and financially challenging. And they had promised us a more technical presentation when we had the hearing, and that has not materialized. So I still find it somewhat difficult to believe that all of these things that they're promising are going to happen. And of course, we have no way of enforcing them. Once the zoning has changed, it's changed, and they can just forget about it, I suppose. So that's my concern.
No, understood. And I will just note that there was a much more detailed explanation of the grid proposal that was in the package. We abbreviated it due to time today, but it did go into a bit more detail in the written materials that were submitted by the applicant team.
Thank you, Commissioner. And my general rule of thumb is I evaluate these things in the context of only the things that I know are certain. And I think that's probably a good rule of thumb. Of course, these are very interesting initiatives, but I think that we should look at all of this in the context of the zoning, the opportunity, and as you pointed out, these are not points that are locked in the zoning resolution. So. Okay, good. Let's go on to Commissioner Levin.
Well, yes, in that spirit, I really have questions about the zoning, but I would say on the green energy plan, look, in the city, we need to figure out every possible means there is to improve the way in which we consume energy. But I think for the reasons that the chair has just laid out, it's a bit of a red herring for this project. It's not anything we have any control over. It's outside the boundaries of what we're doing here. I wish them all the best. It would be great if it could happen, but we can't assume that it will. But I'd like to drill down a little bit, Annie, on the way you started us off by focusing on the land use issues here. I've been thinking about the zoning that's sought here, which is an R10 equivalent. We can speak in terms of residential zoning because this is fundamentally a residential project. At least that's the really important sort of public benefit aspect of this project is a whole lot of housing on an underutilized site. And I fully agree that some kind of zoning to allow more housing here is a very good thing. And I understand that 145th Street is a wide street. It's just across from the river. But I'm still having trouble getting my head around an R10 equivalent, given that there is very little of that scale zoning immediately around. All the other large campuses are zoned at an R8 equivalent. We did map some R10 equivalent in the East Harlem rezoning, which admittedly is like a mile away from here, but it's still Harlem. So we still think in the same framework. And in that case, while the bigger densities were allowed, there were pretty significant height limits placed on the areas where the R10 equivalent zoning was allowed. And then I look across the river to the more recently rezoned sites on the other side of the bridge, where there's some pretty significant development happening there too. But those are C44, which is not as dense as what's being proposed here. So much as I'd like to reach for as much as we possibly can, I'm still having, maybe you can help me get to the same point where you are, apparently, believing that this proposed zoning is appropriate for this site.
Sure, I'm happy to start us off, and if Eric and Jose want to weigh in, and I think we will certainly agree with you that, it's not that there is other R10 equivalent districts immediately in the area. Sometimes when we do see rezonings, we look towards the immediate surrounding map districts. But here we recognize that this is going slightly beyond as far as map density. I'll just note that when we were looking, we were understanding that we will have some bulk controls through, height limits due to it being a large scale and it having approved drawings through the special permit. So we kind of know what we're to expect. And we did work with the applicant through the pre-certification process to get to a building kind of bulk and density distribution across a fairly large development site that we think is appropriate given some of the surrounding towers in the area that are lower density just due to the kind of tower in the park nature of the developments. And I think that just, we're looking ahead at the amount of, the need for the deep need for affordable housing in Harlem and across the city, and looking for opportunities where we can go a bit above what we've, done in the surrounding area to place density at transit accessible locations and where we deem to be appropriate.
And I would just follow on to Annie's statement by, saying that from an urban design perspective, we are looking at what the end result of the zoning can result on the individual site. And if in the department's view in evaluating the applicant's proposal, the resulting building that comes from the mapping of an R10 equivalent district here is not dissimilar from, as you point out, Commissioner, buildings that are present in lower density districts, but in larger tower and park settings. They have similar building forms, similar heights in the immediate vicinity. So those are obviously much larger sites. So the R8 zoning that is present, can be pulled up into taller buildings on larger sites. So the urban design result from these two different zoning districts, it still results in similar building forms.
Okay. One more question, if I may, and that is, we've heard consistently and strongly from many in the community board and the borough president that there needs to be more affordable housing here. And I believe the applicant said at the public hearing that they were attempting to reopen discussions with HPD about some subsidy that might allow that to happen. Is there, and I'll we should recognize that what the developer is proposing to do here is consistent with MIH. They're building the affordable housing that would be required under MIH, and to do more, I think, would require a partnership with the public sector to encourage that to happen. Have there been any developments since the public hearing that would encourage us that there might be the possibility of more affordable housing here?
The applicant has met with HPD commissioner recently, and I believe they were planning to meet today with the deputy mayor. We don't have information on what the details of the meeting were, but we know they're having some conversations, and they continue to have those conversations as they move forward the proposed project. We don't have a specific resolution yet on to see if any extra subsidy is going to be provided for this for the site. But if we do find any information before the review session in April 11 or in between the vote, which is slated for April 25th, we will definitely forward that information to the commission.
Okay, yeah, that would obviously be very significant information. So thanks for that. We'll stay tuned.
Thank you, Commissioner Levin. Commissioner Goodrich.
Sorry if I missed this, but I was wondering if the applicant mentioned anything about to be honest, I'm still confused about the talking specifically with the NYCHA residents as opposed to other residents. So I wonder, I know that was, I don't know if necessarily, that was a little bit of the hearing, but just to clarify, what I'm referring to is we had NYCHA residents come and testify in support of the proposal. And when asked, they said that they were able to get a special presentation about the proposal. Some of them, I think they said they were able to talk to the developer. And then we had a lengthy discussion at last one about, I don't know, I just was wondering if the developer mentioned that. I mean, if the applicant mentioned.
In terms of the conversations with other organizations of members of the community?
Like the specific choosing of NYCHA residents.
Would it be helpful, Commissioner, we can specifically ask the developers to give us sort of like an itemized readout of who they talk to in the community? Would that be helpful? Because I think, yeah, there was a lot of, they talked a lot about who they talked to, but it never was sort of spelled out. Would that be helpful for you?
Yeah, I'll just phrase it this way. Maybe it's he said, she said. Like some tenants are like, I never heard from this developer, and then other tenants were like, I had a special meeting. So I think I was just thinking it would be helpful to know, did you reach out to everyone and they just decided not to come, or did you only reach out to NYCHA?
Yeah,
that's what I would say.
I will add a note. I mean, in the community board recommendation, part of the resolution included a memo from the applicant that listed out the different organizations that they reach out to and the dates that those meetings happen. I can definitely resurface that and circulate that with the commission again. It was part of, because the same question came out in the community board to see who had they met with after the claims of, we have met with elected officials and other people. So we do have that information, outlined for the commission.
Great. Thank you. Other questions, Commissioner Goodrich? No, you're good. Okay. Okay. Commissioner Levin, back to you. Oh, maybe not.
Well, not so much a question, but just an observation that it's, and this is a great line of inquiry. I think it's good we should get the list of, have a clearer understanding of the applicant's community outreach on this application. But I would say it's pretty typical for an applicant on a project of this scale to fan out across the community and identify those organizations with whom it would be appropriate to have a presentation. And it's very common for an applicant to organize a discussion with a NYCHA Tenants Association. So it shouldn't be surprising or alarming. And in fact, it's reassuring when an applicant particularly wants to talk to the NYCHA community. Those are very important communities. confronting an application like this. They'll go talk to the community board, and we should, you know, to the extent NYCHA residents will often be participating in the discussions of the community board, but sometimes there are reasons that they don't. So those communities need to understand what's happening, and it's good when the applicant takes the initiative to go talk to large groups of residents about something that's happening in their neighborhood. But I really like the idea that has emerged from these questions that Commissioner Goodrich started asking, is to get a list and get an understanding of what meetings have happened and what kind of outreach how comprehensive has the applicant's outreach been. It goes far beyond just what's required by ULURP in the best cases.
Great. Let's do that. They're certainly watching, so we'll ask here, but also let's send them a note with that request. Great. All right. I see no other questions or comments. Ryan, I believe that we're at the end of our agenda for today. Is that accurate?
That is true. This is the last item on our agenda. So
Okay. Well, then we thank the commissioners for their participation. It was a long afternoon. I want to thank the staff of the city Department of City Planning. They did a tremendous amount of work to prepare for all of this and everything that's on the agenda for this week. And we will see you all on Wednesday. And with this, we are adjourned. Thanks, everybody.
thank
Take
you.
care.
Thanks.
Take care.